Due to copyright, I can't publish many audiobooks on YouTube. At our audiobook novel service, we offer access to over 300 full novels from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, Wuxia, and more, all in high-quality audio format. Each novel is available with a one-time payment only. No subscriptions, no monthly payment, and no ads. Payments via PayPal or Ko-fi. To browse the full list of available novels, message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out our full catalog on Discord. Chapter 301, Heat of the Battle. In the fleeting moment that Northern was busy copying his talents, Cal had materialized behind a White Walker, and with a casual flick of his wrist, Cal punched through the creature's back, his hand emerging from its chest, fingers clenched around a still-beating heart. The walker's eyes widened in shock, its body convulsing as it realized its fate. Cal withdrew his hand, the heart slipping from his fingers to fall into the snow, steaming in the cold air. The walker crumpled, lifeless, before it even hit the ground. Another walker, a female, seeing its comrade fall, roared in rage and charged at Cal, swinging a massive hammer. Cal's eyes gleamed with amusement as he ducked under the blow, his movements fluid and effortless. The female walker's momentum carried it past him, and Cal spun, delivering a brutal kick to the back of its knee. The female walker dropped to one leg, and Cal's hand shot out, grabbing it by the back of the head. With a savage twist, he snapped the creature's neck, the sound of breaking bones echoing through the clearing. He let the body fall, his expression one of almost bored detachment. Meanwhile, Northern's clones were locked in their own battle. The clones fought with a synchronized efficiency, their daggers flashing as they dispatched one walker after another. One clone ducked under a sword swing, slashing at the walker's legs and sending it sprawling to the ground. The other clone moved in, driving his dagger into the walker's back, severing its spine. They moved together, a deadly pair, cutting down any walker that dared to come near them. Finally, Northern raised his head from the panel he had been locked onto, stretched his legs and looked to the rest of the walkers scattered abroad. In fact, the more they vanquished them, the more they appeared. Northern had no doubt at this time that it was the entire settlement they were fighting. Just that there were no children among them. Wait, had there ever been children among them? That was actually one thing Northern had missed. In the entire settlement of White Walkers, it seemed that Ulzard was the only child. Fishy, fishy indeed. Northern, after stretching, straightened his back and looked ahead. Now then, shall we start properly, friends and foes? His eyes gleamed with newfound vigor, heart beating with pristine excitement as they pumped in readiness to use the new talent. Northern could feel it. The very attempt to even put the talent to use was causing significant changes in and out of his body, like the increase in the speed of his heartbeat. The chaos around him felt like it had slowed. The movements of the White Walkers seemed sluggish. He took a deep breath, feeling the cold air fill his lungs, and prepared to unleash his new abilities. The battlefield in that moment was a frozen tableau of violence and desperation, and in the next moment, it came into sharp focus. White Walkers, their faces twisted in feral rage, continued to close in on him from all sides. Northern's clones, precise and unyielding, held their ground, their daggers flickering like serpentine tongues. Within it all, Northern felt an exhilarating sense of anticipation. Then he muttered, "Velocity dash." Immediately the ability was activated, the world around him blurred. In an instant, Northern was across the clearing, his sword slicing through the necks of two White Walkers before they could even register his presence. The speed was intoxicating, a rush that made him feel almost invincible. He spun on his heel, launching himself at another group of enemies, his blades carving arcs of death through the air. Meanwhile, Cal continued his own brutal ballet. The air shimmered around him as he reappeared amidst a cluster of White Walkers, his movements a blur. One moment he was there, the next he had vanished, only to reappear behind his foes, his fists and feet delivering devastating blows. Sometimes he even ignored distance, going in and out of reality as he deemed fit, appearing instantaneously and leaving his enemies disoriented and broken while paying attention only to himself. Northern, however, even though he now had an excellent ability, a battle-useful one for that matter, still kept his eyes on Cal. He wanted to learn much, see how he made use of each skill. A compartment out of all his eye compartments was reserved for following and observing the strange Cal, while also paying an equal rate of attention to his own battle and sometimes even replicating Cal's moves. Of course, this also meant that his moves were slowed here and there as he was not able to maintain maximum focus. He was not so smart as to have his focus divided into two and not be affected by it. A scratch here, a dodge by the skin of the teeth there, another lame miss here and there. Northern's chaos eyes tracked Cal's rapid movements with difficulty, even with their enhanced perception, and he couldn't help but marvel at the seamless fluidity with which Cal moved, striking down opponents with casual efficiency. There was an art to Cal's combat, a lethal grace that Northern couldn't help but admire, even in the heat of battle. But there was no time to dwell on it. Northern refocused on the immediate threat. A trio of White Walkers charged at him, their crude weapons raised. Feeling the heat of the moment, Northern activated Sonic Surge, and a shockwave of energy erupted from his position, sending the attackers sprawling. He was on them in a flash, his sword slashing in a blur of motion. One fell, its chest cleaved open, while another lost its head to a swift decapitation. The third tried to rise, but Northern's blade plunged into its heart, ending its struggle. And funnily, his clones were mirroring his movements with uncanny precision. One clone ducked under a spear thrust, his dagger slicing across the walker's belly, spilling its entrails onto the snow. The other clone somersaulted over a sword swing, landing behind the attacker and driving his blades into the walker's back. They moved as extensions of Northern's will, each strike a testament to their perfect synchronization. But the battle was just getting started. Chapter 302. Skill of a Copycat. Northern was not used to such a high level of speed yet. Sometimes he miscalculated the time it'd take to land some strikes. Since All Eyes had initially enhanced his vision, he was often used to calculating his delivered strikes before rendering them. And now that All Eyes had evolved due to chaos, that particular feature of his had gotten way better ever since. Sometimes he just stared at all his opponents, determined their locations, and with spatial awareness he didn't need to look a second time. However, with Chaos Eye's 4-compartment view he could now even do better. His seeing was optimized beyond human, perhaps even monster standards. If there was anything Northern shouldn't be worried about, it was seeing at all. Cal, after delivering a sick blow to one White Walker before him, finally paused and surveyed the battlefield. He turned back only to see a flood of white corpses. He had most definitely killed a lot, but he knew that more of the work had been done by Northern and his clones. And with what he had seen of Northern so far, he was beyond impressed. He had thought him to be a reckless brat before. Even though Northern had the eyes of a seasoned warrior, someone that had to walk through hell to survive, his appearance was still that of a youngling, as Cal saw it. But now, his orientations were seeking another direction. Just as he thought about it, Cal moved his head to find where Northern was. As they fought on, they were moving forward, moving through the clearing that separated one house from the other and leaving a trail of corpses behind them. The clones were not even in sight now. They had probably entered a corner to pursue an enemy. Northern, however, was in front. Cal turned his head forward. Just then, one clone stepped out of the corner, his face marred with blood, glanced at him and shot forward. That almost gave me the chills. If it was not because they were wearing off-white leather armor, and Northern was wearing a black one, he'd have undoubtedly mistaken the clone just now for Northern. He continued forward, observing Northern from a distance. When he got closer and could see Northern's movement vividly, Cal's brows furrowed slightly. Has he always been this fast? He muttered to himself. Of course, Cal's first meeting with Northern was inside the rift. So, there's no way to say how powerful Northern had been all the while. And it didn't even cross his mind that Northern had copied his skill. Of course, why would it? The very concept of being able to permanently copy someone else's talent is impossible to exist in this world's formulation. And that is because the very concept of not having a soul core is very impossible. Even mundane humans have soul cores. It's just that theirs had a unique structure and was unaccommodating to essence. It wasn't their fault or anyone's. It's just the soul of the person. Never would it cross anyone's mind. Not native foreigners, not natives. He watched for a few more seconds. Then a small frown carved his brows. Ha! What is this? Cal could recognize some semblance of his own movements in the way Northern shifted between the White Walkers. It was chaotic of some sort, but there was a resemblance, even though it was slight. Cal stood akimbo and tilted his head a little. Or am I imagining it? He thought, but also thought that he possibly couldn't. His footwork was one that was specifically designed for his speed-based ability, and he was only able to master it after several drills for 3 years. Before then, his movements were usually all over the place, too elaborate, such that his speed usually worked to his own disadvantage. After mastering the wind-stepper footwork, which was taught to him by his own uncle, everything got better. His movements too got better, and his use of his ability grew drastically. He could tell instantly that what Northern was using was his, but at the same time he got very confused because there was no rhythm to it. If anything, it seemed disjointed. And yet, Northern was keeping his own with it, effectively eviscerating them one after the other. He showed no signs of letting up. He kept pushing forward, swift and fluid, slashing monsters after monsters with blinding speed. What had started as a battle where he was defending and attacking had transitioned into a one-sided massacre, like he was killing mob monsters. And these were all Hellion-rank monsters. Cal soon rejoined the battle. Both of them kept pushing forward with the clones. Northern's breathing at some point became even, as at that, he still had his breathing under perfect control. Despite their efforts, more White Walkers continued to emerge from the snow, some out of houses. Their numbers were seemingly endless. But Northern and Cal showed no signs of slowing down. They cut through the defenses of the monsters like they were plunging into tofu. Northern pushed one leg forward and leaned. Immediately, the wind swirled around him like a protective aura of some sort. In the next moment, Northern flashed across in a trail of snow, entering into the group of the White Walkers. They could barely track his movements, let alone mount a coordinated defense. He extended both his sword arms instantaneously and swung them together, exploding forth a flurry of strikes that not only marred irreparable flesh damages but carried enough force to scatter them like bowling pins. Cal, watching Northern in that moment, paused. He'd be damned if he didn't recognize his own ability. However, he was still left confused. What is this? He was sure there would have been no way that Northern would be able to copy his talents. That shouldn't be possible as far as the history of his world goes. So what was happening? He questioned himself internally while watching as Northern continued to cut down the White Walkers over and over again. He was lost, definitely, but the battle still had to go on, didn't it? I can talk about it with him later. Right now, let's focus on surviving. Chapter 303. The Impending Doom. Raven swiped her blade to the side, getting rid of the blood of the monster she had just slain. She stared aloof for a couple of seconds. The floor was crudely decorated by bodies of White Walkers, slain in a boorish manner, unsightly to the sane. Her face and armor were stained with violet blood. A cold, icy glare emanated from her crimson eyes, viciously scanning the environment. The one White Walker that Northern had spared knelt down with a terrified expression on his face. He was breathing hard, all his features contorted so badly and pale. She stood nonchalantly and just stared, trying to find something. The mountain was a literal wall. However, she could tell that there was something beyond it. After all, why would guards be stationed at this particular place? And why would so many of them give their lives just to stop her from reaching this point? Although all their efforts were in unfair vain. She had not even sustained a wound in battle. After a while of staring, Raven turned to the kneeling White Walker and asked, "Where's the way forward?" The White Walker trembled at the sound of her voice. Of course, he didn't understand what she was saying, but he stood nonetheless, shakily running towards the icy rock. He paused in front of it, shivering tremendously. Raven could tell there was something there that he feared. She pierced him with a glare, watching him tremble yet again. This one was completely overwhelmed by the fear of her. She just had to remind him that she was the only one he could see right now and focus on. His immediate death was imminent should he refuse to cooperate with her. And he seemed to understand that with the vicious glare she shot at him. However, there was another method she could use. She just didn't want to. She'd prefer for it to be a last resort. "Way forward," she pressed, hardening her voice and gaze. The White Walker shivered like he had a slight seizure. He was limping on one leg and slowly moved to the side, caressing the rock surface. His hand stopped at one point and pushed inside, causing a slight tremble in the landscape. The White Walker again seemed to hesitate, but Raven's glare only got more terrific, causing him to carry on. He began to press different rock patchments that were hidden on the surface of the rock, that served as the base of the mountain. When he finally stopped after pressing like 10 of them, then he stepped back and trembled. The entire landscape shuddered heavily, and then the snow that covered the surface of the rock began to fall off, like something was being moved away. After a while, a dark cavern entrance was revealed before Raven's eyes. Hoping that he had managed to satisfy her, the White Walker slowly turned to her, his face desperately begging for mercy. However, Raven swung her hand sideways, separating his head in a clean slice. The body slowly crashed to the ground. She cast it a disdainful look before she turned her eyes to the entrance of the cave. The mouth of the tunnel was an ominous gash in the sheer face of the ice mountain. A frigid wind whistled through the narrow entrance, carrying with it an eerie whisper. As Raven stepped into the tunnel, the world outside slowly seemed to vanish, swallowed by the oppressive darkness that clung to the cavern walls. The air grew noticeably colder within the tunnel, the temperature dropping with each cautious step forward, but she could still manage thanks to the amazing cold-resistant cloak the White Walkers had given to her. The walls, carved from the mountain itself, were smooth yet glistening with a thin layer of frost that sparkled like a field of stars under the dim light of every flickering torch, 10 meters away from each other. Every now and then, a faint blue glow emanated from deep cracks in the walls, the result of some unknown luminescent mineral buried within the ice. These occasional glimmers provided just enough light to reveal the tunnel's rough, uneven floor, littered with loose stones and patches of slick ice that threatened to send the unwary traveler sprawling. So Raven could see quite well even though it was dark. As Raven descended deeper into the tunnel, the air grew thick with a musty, damp smell. The temperature continued to drop, and the faint sound of running water became more pronounced, mingling with the low, distant rumble that seemed to emanate from the very heart of the mountain. Raven, at this point, was beginning to feel the cold bite deep into her bones. She was beginning to shiver slightly. It felt like she was approaching the heart and source of the cold itself. And it brought an ominous feeling with it. Raven clenched her fist and frowned but did not stop walking either way. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel opened into a vast, cavernous chamber. The ceiling soared high above, lost in shadows, while the floor was a maze of uneven ice and ancient stonework. At the far end of the chamber, the entrance to the underground palace loomed like the mouth of a forgotten beast, its gates ajar and welcoming in a foreboding way. Raven took a deep breath, surveyed her surroundings with a cautious gaze, and when she confirmed that there was nothing more, she continued forward. The palace itself stood in a state of disrepair, its once mighty walls crumbling and draped in thick black curtains. The grand entrance, framed by towering pillars of ice, was chipped and weathered, the intricate carvings barely discernible beneath the encroaching ice that crept over everything like a slow, inevitable tide. Inside, the palace was a testament to its former glory, now reduced to haunting echoes and silent memories. The grand hall, once filled with the light of 1,000 candles, was now a cavernous void, its walls lined with shadowy alcoves that seemed to whisper of forgotten tales. The marble floor, once polished to a mirror-like sheen, was cracked and pitted, overlaid with a treacherous sheet of ice that mirrored the ghostly outlines of the decaying chandeliers above. Faded tapestries hung in tatters from the walls, their rich colors dulled to mere shadows of their former vibrancy. Stone statues, once proud and imposing, stood in silent vigil, their features eroded and softened by centuries of frost and neglect. In the center of the hall, a grand staircase spiraled upwards, its balustrade wrapped in a delicate lace of ice. Each step was a treacherous journey, slick with frost and littered with the debris of fallen masonry. The steps led to a series of corridors and chambers, their doorways gaping like dark mouths, inviting exploration but promising only the cold embrace of horror. Raven stood amidst it all, shivering from the intense cold that emanated from this place. Undoubtedly, this was it. This had to be somewhere that was very important to the rift. It had to be the heart of the rift. It had to be the rift core. Her brows furrowed with stark determination as that realization dawned on her. In that moment, however, heavy footsteps began to resound in one of the chambers, slowly getting closer to her and getting heavier. She could tell without needing to confirm that something strong and big was coming for her. And yet, her face betrayed no emotions, not even the slightest show of fear. Chapter 304, Child of Light Part 1. As the creature slowly got towards her, Raven could see a blue, almost purple glow emanating from one of the chambers that opened afar from her. She stood with caution, her hands tightly clenching her sword and her brows lowering intensely. Her eyes, in fact, seemed to glow. And slowly, the creature revealed itself before her eyes, taking steady steps out of the chamber. Her eyes widened as she saw it. It wasn't that tall but was at the very least taller than her, probably around 6 feet 9 inches. Its body, however, looked like it was sculpted from translucent blue ice, shimmering in the dim light. Every facet glinted like a diamond under a celestial spotlight. Majestic horns spiraled from its head, curving upward with a regal yet fearsome elegance, framing a face that exuded a godly power. Its eyes, glowing with an ethereal light, were pools of frozen azure, piercing through the frigid air with a gaze that seemed to hold the wisdom of ancient eons and the menace of unknown but vicious dangers. A massive trident, sharp and foreboding, was gripped tightly in its formidable hand, each prong glistening with a deadly sheen. The weapon's shaft, seemingly carved from the darkest ice, extended with a menacing elegance. Raven saw all of this, and didn't know when she breathed deeply in and out. She quickly summoned her shield and lowered her stance, holding it to her front and her silvery sword to the side, with her eyes glinting with a faint white light in the depth of her crimson pools. The creature took closer steps, slowly but heavily, and finally stopped barely 9 meters away from Raven. Raven took a deep breath once again, one that misted in the cold air. Her heartbeat was the only thing faster than the icy wind whistling through the decrepit hall. Her gaze was fixed on the creature, unwavering, frighteningly focused and piercing into its form in every corner and side, calculative and judgmental. She was actively working her head to find the best possible route of attack. She stood and awaited the monster to approach first, which caused the air to be drawn into a heavy and suspenseful tension. The silence between them then stretched taut, like a bowstring ready to snap. For that moment, it felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable clash. Then, with a sudden burst of movement, the creature lunged forward. Its trident whistled through the air, aiming directly for Raven's heart. She sidestepped with her usual grace and blocked her side with the shield, causing the weapon to skim across her shield with a screeching sound, burying its prongs into the ground with a resonant thud that shook the walls. Raven spun on her heel, her sword flashing in a swift arc aimed at the creature's flank. But it was fast, faster than she had anticipated. The creature swung its trident up, catching the blade in a shower of sparks and deflecting the strike with an effortless flick of its wrist. The force of the parry sent a jarring vibration through Raven's arm, but she didn't let it slow her movement, not even a bit. She pressed her advantage, her sword becoming a blur of silver as she launched a flurry of attacks. Each swing was a calculated strike, aiming for the creature's exposed joints and the delicate-looking facets of its icy armor. The creature responded with equal ferocity, its trident moving with a deadly elegance. It spun and twirled the weapon, the prongs slicing through the air in a series of rapid, fluid movements that kept Raven on the defensive. She parried and dodged, her shield absorbing the brunt of the attacks that she couldn't evade. With a sudden, powerful thrust, the creature drove Raven back. She stumbled but quickly regained her footing, her shield raised defensively as she retreated a few steps. The creature followed, its trident slicing through the air in a series of lightning-fast strikes that forced her to parry desperately. Raven's mind raced, searching for an opening. But amidst the thousands of thoughts that raced through her mind, she still managed to keep her composure and effectively deflected most of the monster's strikes. And her shield absorbed the ones that carried more power, in order to save her grip from the force and pressure they carried. They charged at each other, lashing ferocious and wild attacks at themselves, and drowning the hall in echoes of their steel clash that sang a cacophony of fury and desperation. In the chaos of that battle was when Raven's eyes caught something, a subtle detail, a rhythm to the creature's onslaught. Despite its seemingly erratic attacks, there was a momentary pause, a fleeting hesitation before each strike, almost imperceptible but there nonetheless. It was a slight tightening of the creature's icy grip, a barely noticeable shift in its stance, as if gathering itself for the next blow. Raven's mind raced. She had to time this perfectly. The creature lunged forward, its trident arcing through the air in a deadly sweep aimed at her midsection. Raven sidestepped just in time, feeling the whoosh of displaced air as the weapon missed her by inches. As the trident swung past, she observed it again, the pause, the tightening of its grip. The creature recovered and thrust the trident again, aiming low. Raven leaped over the prongs, twisting in midair to avoid the follow-up swipe. Again, that brief hesitation, a split second where the creature's movements seemed almost calculated, as if it were drawing power from some deep, inexhaustible well within its frozen core. She landed lightly on the balls of her feet, her muscles coiled and ready. This was it. She could see the pattern now, a heartbeat's hesitation before each attack. She just needed to exploit it. And in order to have a maximum result, she knew she'd probably have to use her talent ability. So far so good. She had always avoided using it. The fact was, she was deadly enough without it. It brought misfortune, pain, and sorrow for her. She hated it, in fact. But right now was a demanding situation. The creature roared, its eyes blazing with a cold, otherworldly light. It lunged once more, the trident stabbing forward with all the force of a battering ram. Chapter 305, Child of Light Part 2. In the nick of time, Raven prepared herself for the toughest defense she could muster. She buried her entire strength beneath her feet and stood strong in pressuring anticipation of whether or not she would be able to withstand the force of getting blasted away like a weightless wood. It wasn't that she was being reckless in any way. She had a plan and, sadly, this was her plan. Her eyes shone with a dangerous ferocity as the monster, with its step destroying the ground, approached her and slung its trident forward. Raven shot forward her hand, pushing one leg behind herself. She blocked the strike like a formidable metal wall meant to block out titans. Then she threw her sword hand backward and muttered something inaudibly. Immediately, Raven felt light coursing through her veins like liquid fire. Her entire body shimmered with a soft golden glow, one that made her look like the personification of a heavenly existence. While enduring and withstanding the powerful force of the monster's attack, she took a deep breath, her eyes narrowing as she focused on the obscene creature. Then Raven's hand moved in a blur, striking the monster at its flank and sending shards of ice scattering into the air. The creature roared, moving a bit back but drowned in obvious fury and ferociousness. Even with its intimidating cry, Raven did not bat an eye. She looked like she knew exactly what she was doing. The difference in their size would make any onlooker be sure that this young lady was arrogant and bound to lose. Because not only was this monster big and overpowering, it also was insanely fortified with impenetrable skin. However, she had a different aura about her. Something in that nick of time earlier had suddenly changed, save the fact that she was now glowing gold. The creature lunged forward again, its trident slicing through the air with a force that could shatter stone. And Raven this time easily deflected the attack. The creature did not relent and immediately garnered itself for another strike. But Raven blocked again. For the next couple of seconds, both of them were locked in a tense and pressuring dance of steel against ice. Raven's mind raced as she danced around the creature's strikes. Each attack she deflected, each dodge she executed, was precise, almost mechanical. But her movements were somewhat faltered even still. She was trying her best to keep herself caged, doing the bare minimum in this fight, because she could feel the light gathering within her, a brilliant, radiant force begging to be set free. The creature thrust its trident again, aiming low. Raven leapt over the prongs, her body twisting in midair and landing lightly with her eyes fixated on the monster's movements. There it was again, that slight hesitation before each strike. It was time. Without hesitation, she took another deep breath, steadily maintaining her entire body composure and footwork with the way she breathed. Then as the creature lunged once more, Raven pierced towards it, hauling her sword from the back with one hand while carrying the entire weight of the shield with the other hand. In front. She powerfully pushed her shield to the front and simultaneously plunged her sword forward with an explosion of golden light. As it was about to strike, the creature hesitated for a split second, just as she had predicted. And in that moment Raven struck. The burst of light not only gave her sword more speed and made it sharper, her entire body became augmented such that she could mightily impede the creature's attack, and also explode her entire body forward as a quick response while plunging her sword. All of this happening at the same time, all in the selfsame second, before any normal eye would have been able to follow. The creature roared in fury as her blade cut through its icy armor, sending shards of frozen crystal flying in every direction. Raven didn't let up, opening the door with this strike. She continued with even more ferociousness. Her movements became a frightening dance of light and shadow. Her body moved with a grace and speed that defied belief. She was untouchable, her strikes landing with unerring accuracy. The creature staggered back, its movements growing more sluggish, more desperate. The creature was lost in the wild dance of the frenzied Raven, getting slashed from all sides at the same time. She continued to move, faster and faster, unseen by the naked eyes. Only her attacks, which were executed in the wake of golden lights, were proof that she was still there and fighting. The creature, when it saw that it couldn't do anything, suddenly stomped its leg on the ground, causing the entire ground to tremble. This caused a slight imbalance in Raven's super-fast movement. But she stubbornly dashed towards the monster, now armed with two swords, horny for the gore of this creature. However, as she approached, the creature let out an ear-tearing bellow that destroyed the sound barrier and threw her away as she dashed towards the monster. She tumbled on the ground, the light of her body growing slightly dim. Blood slowly rolled down her ears as she tried to stand up. The creature, having turned the tides of the battle, or so it thought, stood gallantly, even though with its ethereal and monstrous facial features, one could see a high note of pride singing upon its face. Raven did not mind it and just stood up. She roughly wiped away the blood rolling down from her right ear and looked at it. Then her face contorted with disgust at her own blood. She hated looking at her own blood. Not because of any cocky reasons such as the hatred of getting hurt. It's just that this sort of reminded her that the Kageyama blood runs in her veins. In the end, she was tied to that cursed family. And being remembered made her incredibly mad at herself for being born at fate, for allowing her to exist in such a crude and terrible family. And now that she was mad, nothing made sense anymore. Not even the clear definition of restraint which she had always employed every single day of her life. Chapter 306. Child of Light Part 3. Raven stood motionless for a moment. The creature, sensing a sudden shift in the atmosphere, began to retreat slowly. She abruptly released her grip on her sword, causing the two gleaming blades to fall, clattering on the ground. In the next instant, they dissolved into white sparks, returning to the embrace of her soul. Raven then looked up at the creature, her eyes blazing. The glow on her body gently faded but continued to flicker. The truth was, Raven's ability was not one best suited for swordsmanship. Of course, what she had just demonstrated were merely body and weapon enhancements. It was the basic effect of her ability. But the true power encompassed much more than that. To put it simply, in terms of talent class alone, Raven was no warrior. She was a mage. She extended one hand forward, her eyes shining with a soft light of sublime coldness. Then she said, "Light manipulation." A speck of light appeared on her palm, shimmering softly, almost dancing in the air. She continued, "Bend to my will. Blaze forward, Hikaros." Suddenly, the white light erupted forward, blazing and consuming everything in its path. The creature, immediately realizing the danger of being caught by such a ferocious attack, leaped out of the way, but it was too late, resulting in it losing one of its legs to the disintegration of the light. Raven watched coldly, withdrawing her hand and folding her fingers, leaving only two, index and middle. Then she uttered again, "Light manipulation. The surroundings at the command of my fingers appear Soros. Vroom vroom vroom." Suddenly, orbs of light began to materialize around her, filling the dim hall with incandescent radiance. The shadows were completely obliterated in the presence of the light. "Monster, I hope you are ready for your demise." The creature glared with intense ferocity burning in its eyes, breathing slowly and heavily. Ice began to extend from the upper half of its amputated leg, coalescing into another foot. However, the color of its new foot differed from that of its entire body. It was almost whitish. Raven knew at a glance that was likely not healing but a replacement. The creature must have used its ice production ability to create ice to support its entire weight and compensate for the lost leg. As if it would make a difference. Death is the only thing that awaits you regardless of what you do. Let me be clear. You probably don't understand me, but you will die by my hand, and I won't even have to move more than a step from this spot," she declared. The creature might not have understood her exact words, but it seemed to comprehend the tone and despised the icy, indifferent gaze she cast upon it. Its breathing grew increasingly labored. It swung its trident wildly, roaring throughout the entire hall, causing it to tremble tremendously. But Raven didn't flinch, not in the slightest. Her face betrayed no hesitation or fear, but instead was brutally etched with resolve and anger, visible only when one looked beyond the indifference she exuded and realized that the reason for that indifference itself was because of extreme anger. The creature surged forward, leaping powerfully into the air in a wake of upheaved stones. It flew across, bringing its massive bulk upon Raven. But the young lady just stood there, surrounded by buzzing orbs of light. As the creature descended, she flicked her wrist, controlling one particular orb of light with her fingers. The orb flew forward, colliding with the side of the creature in midair, and instantly exploded into spears of light that plunged through its body, protruding from different parts. Then Raven stepped aside slightly, allowing the creature to crash to the ground, pain-stricken. She lowered her cold gaze on the creature, raised her hand up and swung it down in a blur. Immediately, several orbs of light fell on the beast, impaling it with more spears of light. The creature convulsed and tried to stand up but struggled. "Each orb of light carries the weight of my misery. I doubt you'd be able to bear even one of them." Raven was not lying. Each orb she created out of light was imbued with the weight of her own misery, manipulating their forms with the sharpness of her vengeance. Hence, the angrier and more passionate she was for vengeance towards her target, the sharper those spears of light became. And the weight remained constant. So far, she had never seen anyone able to lift them except herself. Of course, she had abstained from using her main talent ability as often as possible, resorting to the sword alone. This time, however, she was just utterly enraged. She hated seeing her own blood. Raven looked at the monster one last time and commanded, "D." Simultaneously, she closed all her fingers and clenched hard. The remaining orbs floating around her attached themselves to the monster, pinning it to the ground. They began to shimmer so brightly that they became blinding, turning the entire scenery into one of pure whiteness. But Raven didn't close her eyes, nor did she step back. She stared directly into them. Then an explosion resounded, one that shook the entire cliff, albeit slightly. but razed and consumed almost everything in the hall except the part where Raven stood, protected by a light barrier. The effect of the explosion continued for a while, eating away at the ground, walls, and pillars like a maddened virus, while Raven just stood there, waiting for it to subside. Even though she was protected by a light barrier, the heat of the explosion caused her skin to melt away, but it continued to regenerate instantaneously. After a while, the light began to dim, returning everything to its usual darkness. Massive was an understatement. Everything in front of Raven was pure darkness, hollowed out. There wasn't even ground beneath her next step. Everything was a deep and wide abyss. In the darkness, however, a voice suddenly rang out. "What insolence dares to destroy my workshop?" Chapter 307. The Formless Demon, Part 1. Northern panted. How long had it been now that they'd been fighting? He had lost count and lost sight of others. Behind him, however, was a sea of corpses, many that he alone had slain. He could hear the sound of clashes here and there around the corners of buildings. He was sure that his clones and Cal were probably still locked in a tiresome battle with the ever-coming monsters. He was tired beyond tired, and his pool of void essence was beginning to run dry. He had barely just enough to keep the three clones, alive. Of course, since Corpse Eater was practically a void summon now, he didn't need his essence to manifest them. Void summons were creatures of their own self. They drew power from the same source he drew it. They, too, had their own reserves of void essence. So Northern did not need to worry about the Corpse Eater. He also didn't want to call Pengu, who was embodying Call. He would undoubtedly be a great asset to the battlefield right now, but Northern refused. He wanted that route to be his last resort. Right now, he just wanted to gain as many talent fragments as he could. He breathed and adjusted his grip on both the Soul Taker and Mortal Blade. His joints felt numb and were throbbing, crudely smeared with violet blood. He still had to continue fighting though. More of the White Walkers were coming out of the palace. Northern stood at the entrance, his gaze cold as he watched them all come out. Then the helmet of Night Terror armor unfolded, covering his face. For visors gleamed with vicious azure flames that shrouded his eyes. Northern dismissed the Mortal Blade and held the Soul Taker with both hands. So far so good, this was the only sword that was the most ideal to use. Since it attacked the soul directly, he'd have to rely on it heavily since he wouldn't be able to use as much essence as he used to. Now, he had to minimize everything and just focus on cutting them down while using the Chaos footwork to get the best of what it is. He just hoped his stamina would not betray him. With an exhale, Northern burst forward, entering into the small crowd of White Walkers in a flash. The moment he appeared, he swung his sword over one's neck, cleanly cutting it off. Another lashed its weapon from the side, but it was already within view. Northern threw a leg backward, kicking away its leg before the axe could make it half the distance. This caused the White Walker to lose balance and fall on one knee. Immediately, Northern twirled and smashed its head with a kick. The other one that leaped at him in that instance was a female. Northern just extended one hand backward and muttered, "Burn," before landing on him. She was consumed by black flames that suddenly shot out of his hands. Having already seen the next attack, Northern already knew what to do. Being close to the palace wall, he shot forward on it, running 2 more steps on it before flipping over the incoming attack. From behind, he plunged the Soul Taker into the monster, wrenched it out through the side, and left the monster's flank torn. Violet gore flowed in abundance, coloring the whiteness of the ground and giving it a crude yet aesthetic visual. Northern didn't mind, he didn't care. He didn't spare another glance at those he had plunged his sword into, for he was 100% sure that it meant their end. There were 2 reasons that formed the foundation of that assurance. First was the lesson he had learned from the Faceless Voice. Because of his frequent use of the same style, in just a couple of hours, Formless had absorbed it to the brim such that Northern felt he was instinctively using the basis that the voice had taught him like he had been used to it for years. If this was the case, he just couldn't help but be so grateful towards the voice, and was also getting to realize the true usefulness of formless. Because under no circumstances will anyone pick up a sword and master its basis of swing and slash in just a couple of hours. Because of how instinctive it felt, Northern was assured that each cut was deep enough to render his prey lifeless. Of course, the voice of the system was there to confirm this belief of his. And usually he was always right. He could tell how deep the cut was. It was a feeling he felt at the tip of his hand every time his sword bit into the flesh of his target. The second reason was because of the Soul Taker itself. After several uses of the weapon, Northern had come to understand a simple yet fascinating thing about the sword. It was a sword that dealt damage to the soul undoubtedly. But the strength of the damage was in sync with the will of the user. There were some enemies Northern had to cut twice, while there were some Northern just cut once. Of course that was before now, when he just covered his face with the helmet. Meaning that Soul Taker's sharpness towards the soul responded to his own resolve to cut. And currently his resolve was razor sharp. So were his movements definite and exact. Chaotic in its pattern and did not stick to one form. He didn't know how it was happening. They were all instinctive, and he was sure that this was all because of formless. The attribute not only just allowed him to copy things from people, it turned him into a demon of adaptation and change. He didn't know what those words meant before. He was just getting to realize it in this battle. Another thing it brought together was the effect of his now increased stats for speed. At first it was hard to keep up with the changes of the new talent, Windstride. But now, he was beginning to get into its groove and even wanted to dare creative improvising, such as exhibiting the amazing speed control he had seen the White Walker display during their fight, coming to a sudden halt in front of him. But he knew better than being cocky. He needed to give himself to a gradual growth. And the realization of what formless truly meant was the beginning of his change. The beginning of everything he would be in the future. His formlessness was bound to make him into a demon of flexibility, adaptation, and development. One that cannot be copied, a non-stereotypical demon. A Formless Demon. Chapter 308. The Formless Demon Part 2. Northern, though exhausted, continued to swing his sword through the flesh of the White Walkers, paying a certain amount of attention to his footwork while also keeping 3 compartments of his view focused on all corners whatsoever that were filled with his enemies. Which meant that he had perfect control of this battlefield. This compartment view of his further boosted his spatial awareness to an inhuman level. Northern could feel it the moment it entered his space of awareness. He didn't have to turn most times, and to top it all, his reflex was already getting used to the whole drill such that his reactions sometimes were swift and unprompted. Northern, with both hands on the Soul Taker, slashed down diagonally, severing the flesh of the White Walker that approached him. Swiftly he made a quick turn. His metal boots scraped against the frozen ground as he pivoted, the Soul Taker whistling through the air. The blade caught the dim light, its edge gleaming for a split second before it plunged into the chest of an approaching White Walker. Violet blood spurted from the wound, splattering across Northern's armor. He wrenched the sword free, the sound of tearing flesh barely audible over the cacophony of battle. Without pause, Northern ducked, feeling the rush of air as a massive axe swung over his head. He could almost taste the fetid breath of the White Walker looming above him. In one fluid motion, Northern rose, driving the Soul Taker upwards. The blade sliced through the creature's jaw, bursting out the top of its skull. For a moment, the White Walker stood frozen, its eyes wide with shock. Then it crumpled, its weapon clattering to the ground. Northern spun, being alerted already to the movement on his left. 2 White Walkers charged, already upon him, their weapons raised high. Using Shuanpa, Northern disappeared from where he was standing, instantaneously appeared right in front of them when they were still on the way to their onslaught. It was frightening. The White Walkers didn't even have the time to react. He swung his sword up and met the first one strike mid-air. The clash of metal on metal rang out and sparks flew as the blades bounced against each other. Using that momentum, Northern pushed forward, throwing his opponent off balance. In the split second it took for the White Walker to regain its footing, Northern had already moved. The Soul Taker flashed, and the creature's head rolled across the blood-stained snow. The second White Walker, having managed to redirect its attack while Northern was dealing with the first, was upon him now. It swung a massive mace, the spiked head whistling as it cut through the air. Northern sidestepped, feeling the rush of wind as the weapon passed inches from his face. He could see each individual spike, crusted with frozen blood and bits of flesh. Northern's counter was swift and merciless. The Soul Taker found solace within the White Walker's hard flesh, sliding in with sickening ease. The creature let out a gurgling cry as Northern twisted the blade, severing its spine. As the body fell, Northern's eyes widened in that moment, his double eyes separating from each other. Quickly, he dropped to one knee, narrowly avoiding a spear thrust that would have impaled him through the back. The White Walker wielding it snarled, its pale face contorted with rage. Northern suddenly vanished out of its view, leaving the White Walker disoriented and confused. Then suddenly, the White Walker felt its entire body shiver, like a demon plunging out of the abyss. His hand shot out from behind, grabbing the shaft of the weapon. With a sharp tug, he pulled the White Walker off balance. As it stumbled forward, Northern brought the Soul Taker up in a vicious arc. The blade bit deep, cleaving through armor and flesh alike. The White Walker's torso split open, spilling its innards onto the frozen ground. The stench of death and decay filled the air, but Northern had no time to process it. More were coming. He could see them emerging from the shadows of nearby buildings, their eyes glowing with an eerie blue light. Northern's muscles screamed in protest as he raised the Soul Taker once more, his breath coming in ragged gasps. As he posed to strike, a mighty shockwave, one that caused the entire landscape to tremble tremendously. Northern and even the incoming White Walkers froze. Northern slowly turned his head back to the mountain behind the palace. His brows creased into a frown and he muttered, "Raven." A strange restlessness invaded him the moment he thought about what could be happening there. That was, after all, the heart of the disaster, and Raven was there alone, dealing with it. He had to get to her somehow, but first he had to deal with these ones before him. Regaining themselves after the shockwave was gone, the White Walkers continued their charge. A particularly large White Walker plunged forward, faster than the others and wielding a massive two-handed sword. This was the first time Northern had seen a White Walker wielding a sword. He met its charge head-on, their blades meeting in a shower of sparks. The impact sent shockwaves up Northern's arms, but he held firm. They exchanged blows, each strike precise and deadly, swinging across the air in crude and flashing lines of arcs. Northern could feel the raw power behind each of the White Walker's swings. It was like fighting a force of nature, relentless and unyielding. But it was not the only one with a relentless and unyielding force. Every brim of his muscles screamed in protest, but Northern bit down on the pain and endured. Tiredness was beginning to set in, and this was the worst possible time. But Northern understood that it was bound to happen. That didn't mean he'd just let it though, considering that right now, in fact, was the best moment to put Chaos footwork to vivid use. He was fighting an opponent one-on-one for more than a minute. They exchanged more strikes, but the White Walker left no openings. He had to create one by himself. Getting an idea of what to do, Northern's eyes ignited with azure flames. Quickly, he shot forward and feinted left, then spun right. The White Walker, caught off guard by the sudden change in direction, left its flank exposed. Northern seized the opportunity, driving the Soul Taker deep into the creature's side. The White Walker howled, a sound that sent chills down Northern's spine. Thrashed, trying to dislodge the blade, but Northern held on. With a grunt of effort, he pushed deeper, feeling the sword pierce through to the other side. As the life faded from the White Walker's eyes, Northern wrenched his sword free. He barely had time to catch his breath before the next wave was upon him. 3 White Walkers attacked in unison, their weapons forming a deadly web of steel. Northern's world narrowed to a series of flashes and impacts. However, Chaos Eyes in collision with the attribute of his new talent attribute. Way of the Wind managed to rearrange each sequence, slowed and synchronized to the speed his brain could process. He parried one blow, ducked another, and narrowly avoided a third that would have taken his head off and staggered back a little because of the imbalance the urgency of his reaction and the tons of information that entered into his head all at once caused. He lashed out with a kick, catching one of the White Walkers in the knee with the metal boot of Night Terror armor. There was a sickening crunch as the joint gave way. As the creature stumbled, Northern capitalized on the opening. The Soul Taker flashed once, twice, 3 times. Each strike found its mark with deadly precision. The White Walker fell, its body nearly cut to ribbons. The other 2 pressed their attack, trying to overwhelm Northern with sheer force. He backpedaled, attempting to flash out of their view. However, his feet slid on the blood-slick ground, which neutralized his use of the Shuinpa ability immediately. For a moment he teetered on the edge of losing his balance. But then muscle memory kicked in. Northern's body moved on its own, guided by countless hours of battle in the kingdom of Red Mine. He twisted, using the momentum of his near fall to add power to his strike. The Soul Taker sang as it cut through the air, finding the gap between one White Walker's horns over its face to its chest. There was a spray of violet blood as the blade cut diagonally through the monster. The last White Walker, seeing its companions fall, hesitated for a split second. It was all the opening Northern needed. He lunged forward, driving the Soul Taker straight through the creature's throat. The White Walker's eyes widened in shock, its mouth opening in a stifled and gurgling scream. Northern met its gaze, watching as the eerie blue light in its eyes flickered and died. As he pulled his sword free, Northern became aware of a momentary lull in the battle. He stood amidst a sea of fallen White Walkers, their bodies scattered around him like broken dolls. But there was no time for rest. In the distance he could see more approaching. Their pale forms moved through the shadows, weapons glinting in the dim light. Chapter 309. The wave of new changes is approaching. Northern held his sword tightly, getting himself ready to face the oncoming onslaught yet again. But in a blistering moment, a massive force pierced through them from behind. It happened so fast that any other onlooker aside from Northern would have caught nothing but a massive streak of yellow lightning that caused a shattered shockwave, one so powerful that the ground was upheaved. Having seen it all happen and how it happened, Northern frowned. He finally decides to draw his sword, Northern watched as Cal swung downward, splashing off the gore on his blade. Then the guy returned his katana to its sheath behind his back and approached Northern. "Did you feel that just now?" he asked as he reached Northern's front. Northern looked at him suspiciously for a second and answered, "Yes, I did." He glanced towards the mountain. "Then I suppose that is your partner?" Northern nodded. "Yes." "And you are going to meet her?" Northern nodded again. "Yes." He suddenly scrunched his face together and leaned his head towards Cal. "Wait a minute. I don't remember ever telling you she's female?" Cal chuckled. "It was obvious from the way you talked about her?" Northern raised a brow. He was silent for a while and seemed to be in deep thought, trying to remember what exact way he talked about her. Did he even mention her at all to him? Cal tapped his shoulder. "Why don't we focus on the mat?" Before he could finish his statement, the Soul Taker was already over his shoulders, subtly about to lick his neck. "Are you insane? You think I'm dumb? Are you trying to gaslight me into thinking I gave you a hint that my partner is a female when I definitely didn't? Who the hell are you?" Cal raised both hands and chuckled. "Easy there, all right? I mean you both no harm. Then you better start talking." Terror dripped from his tone. Cal was silent for a while, lingering. Then he started. "I just saw the 2 of you when you came into the rift." Northern narrowed his eyes. "I didn't want to give myself away, and I didn't even know you guys." Northern frowned. "Give yourself away to who?" Cal scratched his hair. His eyes were beginning to look stressed. He sighed and said to Northern, "Listen to me and listen carefully. This gate has 2 guardians." Northern's frown deepened a little bit. "Is that even possible?" he inquired as a response. Cal gestured with his hand, a slight wave, saying, "Wouldn't you agree with me that these days we don't even know what is possible and what is not anymore?" The tides of the rifts are changing. What we used to know as the definition of rifts, its statutes and systemization are changing. Everything is changing. This rift not only shares two guardians but has its entrance connected to two regions at once, and contains two area sectors which are complete opposites of each other. And I dare say that we might have to welcome the possibility of two rift cores. His words made some sense and gave Northern some explanations he needed, reasons as to why the core of a rift would be the core of a monster when it usually wasn't recorded so. Which meant that Cal himself had experienced similar situations before now. This fact took Northern by surprise and made him only more curious as to who the stranger is and where he is from. He called it Stuart? However, this didn't provide answers to Northern's questions. As interesting as they sounded, Northern could tell they were meant to be a diversion. Or perhaps the stranger was not done talking. Thinking that he could be wrong about his former thought, he decided to give Cal the benefit of the doubt. So, Cal looked at Northern for a couple of seconds and lingered. Then he sighed and his thick voice could once again be heard. I had my presumption before, but I think a guardian dwells in that mountain. Then he turned his head, following the trail of the light in the sky. And the other at the end of this light? So which of them were you running from and why? Cal smiled with his eyes. Northern's questions, no matter how hard he tried to divert, were bringing him back to the main course. Seriously, he had thought Northern would be easy to fool just a few hours ago when they met. But at the same time, it felt like a lot had happened to the white-haired kid in those few hours. For some reason, he seemed different. The gaze upon his face was calm, too calm for a kid his age. Cal pointed towards the trail of the light in the sky and said, Him. Sura. Northern looked towards the light and soon returned his gaze to Cal. Then asked, What did you do? His tone was serious and blunt, almost intimidating Cal, making him almost forget that this is a kid, at least looked like one. He smiled with his eyes again and released an ear-to-ear grin. Nothing much, we just had a very slight disagreement, and didn't get along well, so he sent me out of his domain. Northern inquired stubbornly, his glare growing intense by the second. Well, he tricked me and I gave him a taste of his own medicine. So, he's been pissed with me ever since and is out for my head. Northern was about to talk but was stopped with a hand signal from Cal. Stop there, he said. I owe you no responsibilities of answers. Make do with that or go ask Sura yourself. Northern stared at him in silence. The atmosphere between them was somewhat suspended in suspense. Then Northern mumbled out, How's he like? Cal inquired, to hear what Northern said very well. I mean Sura, how strong is he? Cal was silent for a second. He folded his arms and looked down, then returned his gaze to Northern's face. What's your name? Northern. Okay, Northern, firstly with the level of strength that Sura has, it makes no sense that this rift is Tier 4 rift. To make things worse, he has a twin who is a complete opposite of him. Northern, except a new set of rifts that defy the logic of the former tiering system are beginning to appear, it makes no sense that one being, just one being would be able to smoke from a volcano. Northern tilted his head backward a little bit. I'm sorry, what do you mean? Sura, he is a drunkard and a chronic smoker, but he smokes from a volcano. Chapter 310 Worlds Apart. His words did not make any sense to Northern. Smoking a volcano? How's that even supposed to work? Northern thought. I know it sounds crazy, but it's the truth. Northern stared at him and folded his arms. Not that I doubt the integrity of your words. Not that I trust them also. I am just trying to picture a monster smoking from a volcano. Cal raised his head a little bit. A monster? Northern nodded in response. Isn't that the case? A monster much more ferocious than these White Walkers. A giggle escaped Cal's mouth. As much as he was trying to hold it, he just couldn't. The way Northern spoke so casually about Sura made him want to laugh so much. If only he knew, if only he had seen. Northern glared at Cal, finding nothing he had said funny. The strange guy ended his laughter abruptly and coughed it away. Don't mind me, it's just that. You think Sura is a monster and I would probably have thought so too if he wasn't the first thing I encountered in this rift. But no, Northern, Sura is not a monster, at least not by appearance. He looks just like you and I'm guessing so does his brother. He completed with his gaze falling on the snow mountain that trembled moments ago. Northern frowned immediately, tracing Cal's gaze just now. His head turned 2 to 3 times to and fro. Wait, what are you looking towards that place for? Cal raised his brows, observing Northern's expression before he intoned. Sura's twin, a pillar of heat and fire, lives in this region, while Sura, a pillar of cold and ice, lives in the volcanic region. Thrown far east, if you follow the spectral light you are bound to get to him. Northern's eyes widened for a moment, Cal observing him for more passing seconds. You really didn't know? He grimaced. Of course I didn't. Raven, my partner. She's probably beneath that mountain right now. He quickly turned to move but was held back by Cal before he could take a step. Northern turned his head back with a furious glare. What the hell are you doing? Cal breathed in deeply. Look, up until now, I have observed you and no doubt about it. You are strong. I have seen Sura's power. If his brother is as strong as he is, then you have no chance at all. Northern turned, nodded his head slightly and gently removed Cal's grip on his arm, then replied. I appreciate your concern, but I can't turn my back on my partner just because the opponent is strong. Besides, how are we supposed to get the core of the rift when we are running away from the Guardian? Cal scratched his cheek a little bit. Suddenly, to Northern, he seemed like Shin whenever he was hiding something. Northern's brows furrowed. What is it? Cal lingered, then opened his mouth. The thing is, you don't need to defeat the Guardians to reveal both cores. Northern's frown deepened. What do you mean? Cal continued. What do you think the little king of the White Walkers and the little queen of the Red Walkers are meant for? Northern raised a brow. There were another type of monster known as Red Walkers? They were probably monsters of the volcanic region, and their bodies are perhaps like the White Walkers, attuned to the heat. And Ulzard had a sister? Was that why he seemed sad sometimes? Wait, does he even know he has a sister? All of this was confusing, yet for some reason it was making some sense. He looked at Cal, lingered for a moment, then slowly asked, and so, what is their significance in this entire rift? Don't tell me. Northern's voice slowed down a little bit. That they are the rift's core? Cal observed the expression in Northern's eyes and said, You look like you would have trouble with it. I'm sorry to break it to you, but they have a fate even more cruel than that. The king of this place is meant to enter into the depth of the volcanic mountain, to retrieve the core himself, and the queen of the heat region is supposed to come here to retrieve the core from the depth of the ice mountain. He paused for a moment, breathing in and out before he continued. Meanwhile, Northern's expression broke apart the more he heard. The dire problem with this arrangement, however, is that it doesn't just end with them retrieving weapons. First, they stand at the risk of dying from intense heat and cold. You might have noticed, but the Boy King has a different skin and markings on his skin. Those were drawn by Sura and his brother to give them both a certain resistance to the heat, but knowing of the fate of the two, they didn't etch ultimate resistance to heat and cold on their skins. So if they should indeed reach the depth of both mountains, they are bound to burn to ashes and freeze to death. Of course, it's a different result if they are escorted by both guardians of the gate. But Sura would never do it. Northern looked at him with a dour frown and inquired, Why? Because the form of the core is a knife and can only be revealed when they both stab the brother's core. It means the brothers have to die for the cores to be revealed and destroyed, as the usual rule is. The complication there, however, is that it can't be done by us. And I don't think the brothers want to die. Sura at the very least looks like he still has plenty to expect from life. Northern sent him an icy glare. And how do you know all of these? How am I supposed to know you are not just making stuff up? Cal chuckled and shrugged. That's on you to believe honestly. Why would I lie about all of this? Sura himself told me about it. I told you right, he was a chronic drunkard and smoker. Northern stood silent for a couple of seconds, processing all of it. Of course, Cal had to be saying the truth. The whole thing was synchronizing too well to be considered a lie. He just couldn't be too sure. Hijacking himself out of his thoughts, he muttered, We can think about all of this later. Right now, I have to help my partner. Cal's carefree expression so far began to crease into a deep scowl. He breathed slowly and said, his voice carrying a somewhat threatening tone, "After all I told you, you still want to go?" Northern scowled back at him. "All you've told me points to the fact that there's no way forward except we go. At least first with the boy's sister. And I advise we deal with Sura. I already have a plan." Northern looked at him carefully. Then he said, "Well, yes. But I'm not going anywhere without my partner." "Arg, damn it, are you going to be stubborn till the end? Your partner went there with her own 2 legs. Didn't she?" "Yes, so? Are you saying I should abandon her?" "Look, we can't kill Sura's brother yet. And you certainly can't fight him without making sure you strike not to kill. You are not strong enough for that. This is honoring your partner. I think it's best we go take the girl as fast as we can." "As fast as we can? How far is this region, and are the Red Walkers just going to let us walk in and grab the girl? And I'm very sure the moment you step into that place, Sura would come for you, if he's out for your head as you said. So tell me, Cal, what do you mean by as fast as we can?" Cal was silent for a couple of seconds. Northern added, "Are you trying to trick me, Cal? Because I really hate it when someone is playing smart with me?" Cal hesitated, swallowed his spit and said, "I'm not trying to trick you. Look, I just want to get out of the rift and I don't care what I have to give to achieve that. You have no idea how long I've been here and how much I've had to endure so far." Northern cast a sympathetic gaze on him. He nodded. "I might have no idea, but as a person that has been through similar, I can picture the pain and frustration. However, Cal, I can't abandon my partner under any circumstance. I understand if you have to do what you must and put yourself first. I also will act accordingly." His gaze towards Cal was cold, and the calmness of his expression was incredibly frightening. Cal scoffed, tilting his head back a little with his eyes fixated on Northern's. "Then, you will let me take the boy?" Northern shook his head. "I have no intention of doing that, since I don't trust you." Cal scowled again. "Then I have to take it by force." Northern looked at him fiercely. "I suppose? But you'd have to kill me to be able to do that, can you?" Cal let out a short giggle. "I really hated that we had to go down this path." He slowly moved his hands towards his sword. Northern nodded with a solemn smile. "Yes, let's blame our differences." Chapter 311. Northern vs. Caladhel Part 1. Northern's breath fogged in the cold air as he squared off with Cal. The tension between them was almost palpable, crackling like the very lightning that surged through Cal's sword as he pulled it a little bit out of its sheath. The eerie silence of the rift seemed to amplify the anticipation, each heartbeat echoing like a drum in the frozen expanse. Cal's eyes narrowed, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of stainless behind his back. Northern tightened his grip on his own blade, his knuckles whitening with resolve. The mortal blade gleamed with an ominous dark aura. This was, after all, the best sword for this occasion. And Northern silently had looked forward to one like it. His muscles tensed and his senses heightened. He could feel the raw power emanating from Cal's blade even without it being pulled out yet. He could tell by all his senses that this guy was no ordinary opponent. Without warning, Cal moved. His draw was blindingly fast, stainless cutting through the air with a sizzling hiss. Northern barely had time to react. He shifted his weight to his back foot, his movements dictated by the principles of chaos. His body twisted in an unpredictable, almost serpentine motion, dodging the initial strike by a hair's breadth. Cal's follow-up was immediate. He pivoted, bringing Stainless down in a powerful arc aimed at Northern's shoulder. The air hummed with electricity as the blade descended. Northern's reflexes kicked in, and he brought his own sword up to parry. The clash was deafening, the force of Cal's blow sending a jarring vibration through Northern's arm. Northern gritted his teeth, absorbing the shock and letting it fuel his resolve. He deflected Cal's blade to the side and pushed forward, the mortal blade darkly flashing in a counterattack aimed at Cal's midsection. Cal was quick, far quicker than Northern had anticipated. He sidestepped with fluid grace, Stainless weaving a path of lightning as he parried Northern's strike effortlessly. The two swordsmen danced across the snow, their blades a blur of black and yellow light. Each movement was precise, calculated, and deadly. Cal's strikes were powerful and deliberate, each one carrying the weight of his experience and skill in a perfect and unhindered mix with unstoppable speed. Northern's style, by contrast, was fluid and unpredictable, the essence of chaos guiding his steps and swings in a manner that defied conventional technique. Cal pressed the attack, his eyes cold and focused. Stainless slashed in a series of rapid cuts, each one aimed to break through Northern's swift and strong defense. But Northern met the onslaught with a mixture of deflections and evasive maneuvers, his footwork carrying him in a swirling pattern that kept Cal guessing. The rhythm of the battle was frenetic, each man searching for an opening. Velocity dash. In a sudden burst of speed, Cal lunged forward, aiming a thrust at Northern's chest. Northern's eyes widened at the sheer velocity of the attack. He thought he had a good grasp on the speed ability, but after seeing the sudden burst of speed that Cal had exhibited, his thoughts were placed on a platform of crucial review. However, in the nick of that moment, he twisted his body to the side, narrowly avoiding the lethal point of Stainless. As he moved, he felt the chaos within him surge. It was a sublime and unexplainable feeling, something he could feel in that instance and could vividly tell its difference from void. It was as if it was responding to his desperate need for agility and speed in order to match up to the level Cal was taking him to. Velocity dash. Northern's footwork became even more erratic, his movements almost a blur. Cal, immediately noticing the change in the air the moment Northern muttered, blinked out of reality to appear before Northern. However, following him, Northern too blinked out of reality and appeared afar from him. In the next moment, he became a blur again, this time faster than the initial moment, such that Cal didn't see his leg move. It was like Shuanpa but was not. Northern was just simply too fast with the velocity dash that Cal's eyes could not follow. That one moment show caused Cal to be greatly horrified. Of course, he had gotten a wild guess that Northern's ability was more of a copy thing, which made sense seeing that he could even copy his own self. Cal, in the midst of the battle, had even gone as far as deducing that Northern could be able to copy him too, which was why he had deemed Northern's ability to be a very dangerous one, and aimed to finish this as far as possible without revealing all his cards. If he got the chance, he didn't even want to use any of his abilities. After using Shuanpa, he only grew more vexed and uncomfortable. However, not even he knew that Northern had not only copied his ability long ago, but had permanently added it to his repertoire of talents. Because the concept of completely copying one's talent is non-existent, as is the concept of a coreless drifter. The mortal blade sang through the air as it arched towards Cal. Belatedly, Cal managed to parry but not without losing his balance. However, he was quick to collect himself, pushing his entire weight on one side and quickly maneuvering Northern's incoming crude thrust attack with an impossible twist to the side. But Northern had already removed one hand from his sword, and as Cal twisted to the side, he was met with a blow that arched towards him, crunching into his face. With an explosion of force, Cal was sent reeling away from the fist attack. He somersaulted and tumbled through the snow ground before managing to use the friction of his knees against the frozen ground to come to a halt. He stared at Northern furiously. His frustration was beginning to grow. What was that back there? He was sure he had bypassed Northern right there. Except he could see the future. How in the hell did he know he was going to go for that movement? Even Cal himself had not predicted so. It was something that just happened in that moment, and yet Northern was able to respond to it like he saw it coming. Cal gritted his teeth in frustration. Despite his superior skill, he found it difficult to predict Northern's movements. Chapter 312. Northern vs. Caladhel Part 2. Cal, after gritting his teeth, swung to his feet and snarled. Velocity dash! He disappeared, drawing a straight line of speed that caused even the snow to rise up in awe of it. Cal closed the distance in an instant. His sword arced through the air, with a trail of lightning. Northern barely managed to bring the mortal blade up to parry. The clash sent shockwaves through his arms, nearly numbing them. He was already very tired but was painfully managing to hold on and being careful enough not to extinguish his reserve of void essence, since he still had to deal with whatever Raven was dealing with in that mountain, or at the very least be of reasonable help to her. Gritting his teeth, Northern pushed back, using the momentum to create space. He shifted his stance, embracing the irregularity of chaos, and once again moving so erratically and formlessly that Cal's gaze went here and there, unsure what to predict or expect. Cal exercised a little patience, and suddenly his eyes narrowed, tracking Northern's last movement. He lunged forward with velocity dash to intercept before the next, stainless a streak of yellow. The moment he reached, Northern twisted, the blade missing him by a hair's breadth. He countered with a swift slash, but Cal was already out of range. Cal attacked again, this time with a series of lightning-fast strikes, and Northern defended, doing away with wasteful movements. He acutely deflected all of Cal's attacks with equal match of speed, while even paying attention to the subtle shift in Cal's footwork. He was using it to learn, comparing its fundamentalism to that of chaos. And it was taking a while to have any grasp, but Northern continued, also making sure his little experiment did not interrupt his battle with a sage. Northern might have missed it, but right now, he was matching the skill and wit of a sage and even daring to experiment improvement in the process of it. Oftentimes does he look down on himself, really. While defending, Cal's sword grew faster, crackling with hurtful sparks of lightning which blurred the movement of the sword. Northern still was matching up. The mortal blade showed more signs of slouching, and was as effective in his hands as the Soul Taker was. Suddenly, Cal moved his legs and swiped below. In that moment Northern's eyes widened. What a foul play! He complained internally, as he felt his legs slide across the icy ground. In that split second of imbalance, Cal grinned at the opening he had forcibly created, flashing stainless towards Northern's exposed flank. As the blade came, Northern let himself fall, using the momentum to roll away. The blade passed harmlessly overhead. As he came up, Northern realized something had changed. The fall, that moment of uncontrolled chaos, had sparked something within him. What if all the while, he had been putting too much effort into controlling chaos instead of letting it be? He had been trying to cause it to match his own style instead of matching his own style to it. To put it in simpler terms, he should be incorporating formless into chaos, not trying to incorporate chaos into formless. With a simple mantra that formlessness can be chaotic but chaos itself can never be formless. There was a form and pattern to chaos as a footwork. He didn't need to eradicate that, he just needed to accept it and attune himself to it. Northern's eyes opened in that moment. It was like he entered an epiphany. He rose, his stance different now. There was a fluidity to his movements that hadn't been there before. The chaos footwork was evolving, becoming something more. Cal, noticing the change, furrowed his brow slightly. He charged again, but this time Northern was ready. He met Cal's attack with a series of unconventional moves, his blade weaving an unpredictable pattern. For the first time since he got conversant with the sword, Cal found himself struggling to read and bypass his opponent. Northern's strikes came from impossible angles, his footwork a confusing dance of advance and retreat. Northern pressed his advantage, the mortal blade viciously arching through the air. Cal parried each blow, but he was being pushed back. After one mighty pushback from Northern's attack, Cal gritted his teeth and suddenly shot forward, unleashing a devastating counterattack with a mutter. Sonic surge. Stainless became a storm of yellow lightning, striking from all directions at once. Northern's chaos eyes widened as he realized he couldn't block them all. In that moment of desperation, the realization came bare before Northern's eyes. Instead of desperately trying to maneuver it, rather give yourself to it. He, after all, is the embodiment of chaos. How bad could it be? With those words resounding in his head, Northern surrendered himself completely to chaos. His body moved on its own, twisting and bending in ways he never thought possible. Somehow, impossibly, he avoided the worst of the onslaught. Cal's eyes widened in disbelief. No one had ever survived that ability before, because its combination with stainless nature of lightning came together to create a devastating form of attack. This signature ability of his had proven itself over and over again by always exterminating his enemies. Yet Northern stood before him, breathing heavily, small cuts adorning his face, but very much alive. The Night Terror armor was untouched, not even a tiny scratch. Cal stood dumbfounded, unsure of what to do or say. The next minute, however, his voice frustratingly crawled out. "You? What are you?" Northern's lips widened, wearing a smug grin upon his face. "What am I? You see, Cal, the thing is, I am just on a pilgrim of answer to that question myself. Who am I? What am I?" He breathed before he continued, standing upright. "You know, they say that the difference between a hero and a villain is what they choose to do with the hurt they feel. They say a hero chooses to never let it happen to someone else, while a villain," he sighed, "lets it consume him and inflicts it upon everyone else. Sometimes I wonder, will I become a villain the moment chaos consumes me, or am I one already?" He looked down, his countenance falling for a moment as he said, "One thing I know for the very least is that I'm no hero, because I can feel whatever makes me human slipping away from my hand with each soul I extinguish. Chaos and void keeps consuming everything within me." Northern raised his head to Cal with a slight show of happiness, vividly faked however. "That is why I'm trying to avoid killing humans. For some reason I am kinda scared of the changes that will happen inside of me should I kill a human." Chapter 313. Northern vs. Caladhel Part 3. Northern sighed and fully raised his head, looking at Cal with a straight face. Cal looked like he had just witnessed the birth of a deranged person. What was wrong with Northern, and why was he talking like that? Was he having a mental breakdown? A mental breakdown was not far-fetched. It was something that frequently happened amongst his own race. It just meant that some people didn't have the mental fortitude to deal with the horrors of the rift. They either withdrew completely, settling to be mundane drifters, or tried their best to be masters and ended their drifter careers there. Was Northern someone like that too? Cal doubted it. Those blue eyes he peered into didn't look like the eyes of a deranged human. Northern was speaking with sincere concern. So he is actually worried about what will become of him should he start killing humans. Chaos and void are consuming him. Cal understood not a word of what the guy was saying. After thinking for a while and finding no better way to respond, he said, "Can't you just overlook everything and give me the boy? We are after the same cause after all. Are you not here to close down this rift?" Northern tilted his head sideways with a blank stare at Cal. He gestured with his sword, pointing to Cal as he spoke. "You think about it too. You met a strange human in the rift, one with pointed ears who can speak monster language when your entire life you thought you were probably the only one that could. This human has been watching you since you entered the rift but chooses not to approach. Instead, he takes advantage of the opening you created to steal the most important thing in the rift. After catching up to him and collecting the boy, he's begging to have the boy back and telling me to trust him, that he will walk into the very place he ran away from, all on his own." Northern paused, breathing silently and fixing a glare on Cal. "Tell me, Mr. Cal, if you were in my shoes, would you be stupid enough to trust such a stranger?" Cal scratched his head sheepishly. "Well, if you put it like that." His expression stiffened the next moment. "Does that mean we have to take this to the end? You want me to kill you?" Northern chuckled. "I'm flattered. What gives you the impression that you can kill me?" Cal forced out a side grin. "I have not even begun to use my abilities. Don't get cocky." Northern chuckled even harder this time. He raised his head to count as he said, "You've used Velocity Dash, Sonic Surge, and Shuinpa. That just leaves out Time Warp and Breeze. I guess Time Warp is the strongest of your abilities for now, and you want to avoid using it as much as possible, but I'm excited to see what you will do with Breeze." Cal froze, overwhelmed by the feeling of terror. What he was trying so hard to hide all along, Northern already knew. What the hell? How? This makes no sense. Wait, maybe he can see someone's talents. I did sense eyes peering into my soul before, Cal guessed internally. His rising confusion was put to a temporary halt when he gave himself that explanation. But he was still curious and furious. And those feelings only grew worse as he intensely began to wonder for real, what the hell is this white-haired boy standing in front of him? If he had to take a wild guess, Northern was at most 16, but he had the eyes of a man and impressive height again. He was intimidating from all sides, and it bothered Cal a lot. He was beginning to really ask himself if he could defeat someone like this. Cal and Northern stood motionless in the icy field, snow drifting lazily around them. The silence between them was electric, a tension that crackled with the promise of violence. Cal adjusted his stance, spreading his legs apart, his sword extended like a beacon of yellow lightning. His gaze was steady, and his face was a mask of cold determination. Northern, observing him, felt a strange mixture of excitement and dread. Northern inhaled deeply. He relaxed his grip on the mortal blade, allowing the rule of chaos to flow through him while strengthening his muscles with a little void essence. He could feel it now, a rhythm to the chaos, a pulse that matched the beating of his heart. He wasn't fighting against it anymore. He was becoming part of it. Without a word, Cal moved. He shifted forward with blinding speed, stainless flashing. Northern's eyes widened as Cal's form blurred. He was clearly now faster than before, very fast, but Northern didn't flinch. Instead, he let his body flow with the movement, dodging to the side with a fluid grace that felt almost natural now. Cal's sword passed so close that Northern could feel the static charge in the air. He twisted his body, bringing the mortal blade up in a sweeping arc. Cal parried, their swords clashing with a sound like thunder. Lightning exploded from stainless, racing along the blade and forcing Northern back. He gritted his teeth, absorbing the impact through his legs and grounding himself. Cal didn't ease at all. He pressed his attack, driving Northern back with a relentless series of strikes. Each blow was faster and more precise than the last, a storm of steel and lightning. Northern's arms burned with the effort of blocking, deflecting, and extreme fatigue, but he moved with the ebb and flow of chaos, avoiding the worst of the attacks. Northern spun away from a particularly vicious thrust, using the momentum to pivot and counter. His onyx blade lashed out in a wide arc, aimed at Cal's midsection. Cal leaped back, the tip of the mortal blade missing him by a fraction of an inch. He landed lightly on his feet, a grin spreading across his face. "You're good," Cal admitted, breathing heavily. "Better than I expected." Northern didn't reply. He just stared at Cal blankly. Cal's voice came out once again. "But aren't you beginning to get tired? How long will you be able to maintain this? I guess keeping those clones does not just come free of charge. Your ability to copy things must come with a burden as well. Until when will it be before you break?" Cal relaxed his posture and stood akimbo with an evil grin on his face, then said, "Maybe I'll just draw this battle out a little more till you break." Chapter 314, Shameful Loss. Northern got what Cal was trying to do, and really, that was smart. He had been fighting for so long that he had lost track of time. The sky above was beginning to get bright, which meant that they were probably nearing morning. If he was to evaluate it, he'd say that he had been fighting all night. It's just like that time. His mind drifted towards the time he fought with monsters all night back at Lothellowan's stronghold. This was a similar problem too. How do I increase my stamina? Northern was beginning to consider basics which he had missed from the beginning, those drills and exercises that increase stamina. I would definitely do that should I leave this place right now. However, right now, I need a miracle. He was not even worried about fighting Cal. He could decide to just bring Cal into this fight and head to Raven. But he wanted to fight Cal. He needed the experience. Then maybe I should send Pangu to Raven then, Northern thought. He straightened his back and summoned Pangu. Cal watched as black flames danced in front of Northern, and within their embrace rose a horned lithe figure with charcoal body and red inscriptions running across its skin like tattoos. The creature looked only at Northern and was on one knee. Find Raven, in that cave, and help her. Pangu, however, knelt there, not moving. I figured. Since the summon did not know who Raven was, Northern had thought that it would have a hard time executing a command like that. He had decided to try it to see Pangu's reaction. Apparently, there was no reaction at all. Northern then pointed forward. Go to the depths of that mountain. Anyone trying to harm the black-haired girl with red eyes there, fight them back. Do not kill them, and your priority should be protecting the girl. Pangu nodded, then stood up slowly. He turned towards the mountain and raised his head a little. At once, he pressed his entire weight down in a crouch and, like a spring, pierced into the air, his force of leap leaving a webbed crack on the ground. It happened so quickly that Cal was signaled only by the force of movement. Northern then turned back to him. "All right, now we can fight well." Cal chuckled lightly. That chuckle, however, was strange. It seemed like a horrifying cry at the trouble he had gone ahead and put himself in instead of an actual chuckle. He looked into the air where Pangu had leaped. Then he brought his eyes back to Northern. "Wait, you had a card like that and didn't use it against me. That's a Maelstrom rank monster." Cal could feel it immediately because he had met Sura and seen how strong his presence was. Although Pangu's was sort of inferior, there was a likeness comparison to both their presences, one that made Cal so sure that the monster that just left was a Maelstrom rank. He looked at Northern for a while and looked down. He then looked up again. This time his expression seemed contemplative. "What other cards are you hiding?" Northern stared at him for a while, then shrugged. "Well, if I wanted, I could surround myself with a horde of monsters, and I still have one more monster I can summon, my strongest in fact, but I won't do that, since I want to savor the experience of this battle with you." Cal let out an exhausted sigh and allowed his sword to slip down his hands. Northern raised a brow. "What? I give up? You are stronger than I am. You win this fight." Northern narrowed his eyes to a slit. "What are you doing? What are you trying to do? You're a sage, do you know? I'm sure you still have lots of tricks up your sleeve apart from your abilities." There had to be something he couldn't copy about a sage, something that set them apart from every other rank. Cal smiled. "While I do admit that there are still tricks, I also have to admit that they will be completely useless against you." Northern gritted his teeth. "You're giving up before this fight gets anywhere. I've not even drawn blood from you at all." Cal looked nonchalant and just shrugged again, causing Northern to boil with more anger. He clenched his teeth and snarled furiously. "I expected more. Don't give up just like that. You are a sage, damn it." Cal solemnly looked at Northern. His expression was neither a smile nor a frown. "Look, North. You are strong. It'd be pure stupidity to continue a battle that I know I will lose. Any sage would face the same fate against a master that can copy talent abilities." Northern frowned and cocked his head with a grim glare. "You're mistaken. I am no master." Cal looked at him. "What? I am a drifter rank. I'm not a master. Yet." Cal frowned. "There's no need for you to reduce yourself so low. There is no way a drifter would have been able to match my movements and block my strikes like that." Northern stared deeper into his eyes. "Exactly. So please put up more fight. Okay? And don't give up this time around." Cal's face, as he realized Northern was being serious, only contorted into that of horror. He, a sage, had just lost to a drifter rank? That's impossible. He couldn't have lost to a drifter, could he? He looked at Northern one more time, who had a furious frown etched upon his pale facial features. Cal could somewhat see it again. He had mistaken him for a master because he was able to stand his ground and had thought that Northern was just hiding his power and masking himself to be of lower rank. But that was actually not the case. He really was of a low rank. He was 3 ranks away from him. And yet, Cal chuckled eerily with his hand shamefully covering his face. "Ash! This is so humiliating." Chapter 3:15. The Joy of Progression. While Cal was covering his face in shame, Northern suddenly heard a familiar voice, which prompted a couple of panels to appear beneath his gaze. He looked down, his eyes slowly widening. "Congratulations! You have gotten a step closer to chaos. Heritage, Chaos Art of Thousand Blistering Step, has advanced to level 2. You have gained a new heritage ability, Chaos Sword Art. You have unlocked the first form, Eternal Chaos. You have 3 subforms in the first form. Be sure to study them later. You have abandoned the hackneyed ways to discover the true essence of chaos. Heritage ability, Thousand Step has evolved to Heritage ability, Chaotic Step. Northern didn't know how to contain or express the joy that was beginning to swell up inside of him right now. While he thought his heritage would grow, no doubt, he never expected it to be this quick. And that was probably thanks to this battle. His mood was suddenly uplifted. He grinned hard and looked towards the mountain. Although he had gained a tremendous improvement with his heritage and finally gained a sword form of chaos, he was still fatigued. But right now, in the face of the excitement that he felt, that didn't matter. Not even in the slightest. All he just wanted to do was draw his sword and fight somebody. Anybody. He would have loved to opt for Cal, but he was very well aware that he wouldn't agree. Cal finally raised his head up and sighed. Northern composed himself. There was still that matter to settle, the one about Ulzard. He wanted to see what Cal's decision this time would be. Well, since he surrendered, there probably wasn't much to expect. He'd have no choice but to yield to Northern's plans or go his way without Ulzard. So, what are you going to do now? Northern's hoarse voice shattered the silence. Cal smirked a little. His face was tired. Do I look like I have a choice? Yes. Northern nodded. You can decide to go your way and figure this out yourself. Or you can try to take him by force. Cal stared at him blankly for a couple of seconds before looking away. You just won't drop it, right? Yeah. The fact that you surrender without playing all your cards is pissing me off. The yellow lightning. Was it your sword thing or your own thing? Cal smiled and responded. Both. After becoming a sage, the soul essence takes a form. Mine is that yellow lightning. Using it with my speed, however, takes a toll on my body and tears my skin. So instead, I coat it on my sword. How fast do you get when you use it on your body? Cal looked at him as he responded to his question. Fast is an understatement and a word that cannot contain it. Comparable to the speed of light. Northern frowned. So that's your ultimate card? Yes and no, it is, but only when I use it with time warp. What does time warp do? Aren't you asking too many questions? Will you answer mine about your abilities? I owe you no obligations in that regard. Northern looked away. I mean, I'm not the loser here.
Cal's brows krasa.
Are you mocking me? Of course not. I am merely speaking truth. Anyways, since you have nothing to offer, I must proceed to my friend and help her out. Northern said and turned away from Cal, dismissing his sword and waving as he walked beside the palace wall to behind. Cal stayed there, frozen and unsure what to do. As Northern went out of view, he turned his head to the opposite direction, where they had been bringing the fight from, and thought, should I just fight his clone and monster, then take the boy for myself and run away? Cal shook his head slightly. He was sure Northern would know the moment he clashed blades with his clones. Moreover, he had lost already. There was no honor in such a lame move. He needed to accept his defeat and work together with this strange boy. However shameful and demeaning it was for a young man like him, he had to accept it. Cal breathed in and out, then followed Northern's trail. A couple of minutes later, Northern arrived at the yard of the palace that separated the mountain palace. His face contorted with disgust as he saw the corpses that littered the ground with their viscera spilling outwards. There was no doubt. This was Raven's handiwork. He looked up and saw the gaping mouth of the cave. Swallowing his saliva, he walked inside. A moment later, Cal also arrived, his face showing the same reaction as Northern. He even had to close his nose and walk inside before entering into the cave. A couple of minutes later, Northern's clone and corpse eater arrived. They dropped the unconscious Ulzard beside the wall and continued what they'd been doing all along. The clone skillfully dipped its hand into the bowels of the corpses with a cold expression and brought out all cores, then placed them into the bottomless bag. His hands and white leather armor were smeared with violet blood, some dried up and darkened, others fresh. The corpse eater too bent down and continued to harvest cores. All along from the beginning of the battle till now, their jobs had been to harvest cores. Northern's two clones also came with handfuls of cores that they held to their chest and poured into the bottomless bag. Together they helped harvest more cores. And after a little while of harvesting, the four entities entered into the gaping mouth of the cave. Northern continued in the darkness, nonchalantly walking as he could vividly see through the dark with his chaos eyes. Moreover, the dark was not disturbing like the one when they were going to Sloria's stronghold. Even as he walked along, he could hear subtle vibrations that made the ground tremble. For sure, Raven was locked in a deadly battle, and he was going to be her knight in shining armor. Or so he thought. Chapter 316. Late to the party. Northern, after walking through the dark tunnel for a while, came across a dark hall, a decrepit palace. But he didn't venture too far because he couldn't see. He just stopped at the entrance and looked forward with a puzzled expression on his face. He stood with his arms folded, contemplating what to do. A minute or two later, Cal silently approached him from behind. But Northern did not even spare him a glance. A little startle would have been very much appreciated. "You are a kid, act like one." Northern did not give any reaction to his words. He just stared forward with his puzzled expression even as he responded to him. "Why would I act surprised when I already saw you coming since you entered the cave? Besides, I'm not a kid." Cal looked at him from behind and almost sneered but ate it up and looked forward. "There's no way in front. Is your friend probably not here?" "She is," Northern responded. "She is this depth and my summon too." "So you are going to go too?" Northern looked at him for a moment and looked forward. "It'll be useless. How will I come out? I can't fly, she can." For someone who was so enthusiastic about saving their friend, you seem so reluctant. Scared. Northern looked away from the depth, still not giving Cal's taunt the emotional reaction that would have been expected from a 15-year-old. He said, "The fight is done. What do I need to do there?" Immediately he heard this, Caladhel frowned. "Huh? What do you mean?" He quickly looked down. All those subtle trembling in the ground was gone now. Everything was eerily silent. He tilted his head back in disbelief, the tone of his voice almost shattering from despair. "No, that can't be." "Yes, it can," Northern responded with an irritated frown. Then he turned his head to face the front. A couple of beats later, someone suddenly slung out of the depth and landed in front of them, on his knee. Northern looked at Pangu, who had a countenance like he had failed his master etched upon his face. He lowered his head, refusing to look into Northern's eyes. The moment after, a gentle flutter rose into the wind. Raven gently landed with swirling air in front of them, pulling a ragged man by his hair. She released his hair, causing the unconscious man to roll away. Northern looked at the man and looked at Raven, who for some reason was still as clean as when she had left him. He raised his chin a little bit. After a while of hesitating, he asked, "I presume you fought the man?" Raven nodded proudly. "Yes, I did. This is the Rift's guardian. His name is Fano, and he claims to be Sura's brother. There are a couple of things he told me that made me hold off on killing him. I'd like to get your opinion on them." She paused and looked to his side, where Caladhel stood. "I see you've made a new friend." Northern, who was still frozen in shock from the last few words she had said, belatedly turned his head to Cal. "Eh? No. He's not my friend. He's an enemy. I thought we are of a common understanding now, come on." Northern glared at him immediately. "How am I to be sure that you won't stab me in the back the moment I turn away from you?"
Cal Shuklat.
"What the hell are you saying? I literally walked to this place behind you. Wasn't that supposed to be figurative? Are you dumb? What is figurative? What's the meaning of that? Are you abusing me or something?" Of course, there were some words that didn't have meaning in monster tongue. He figured this could have been one of them. Northern face-palmed himself and looked towards Raven, speaking in normal tongue. "Forget about him. What do you mean by, get my opinion? And why are you unharmed after fighting a maelstrom rank monster?" A delightful smile adorned Raven's lips the moment he asked the latter question. "I am now a maverick rank. Savant by title." Northern frowned. "What?" At that moment he immediately remembered, then looked, using C. He waited in silent anticipation. Finally the panel popped up, but suddenly there was a glitch, then it disappeared. Disoriented and confused, Northern looked at her face. She was wearing some sort of grim grin. "What did you do? What do you mean?" She responded like she had no idea what was going on. But she was clearly wearing that satisfied grin and was enjoying it. "You tried to look into her soul, didn't you? Just like you did with me?" Northern looked at Cal. He wasn't supposed to know about that, but he did block it out, so maybe he knew. "I thought the blocking out was Ul's doing." Cal continued without his response. "If that was the case, then she blocked it out just like I did. Although it shouldn't be possible for a savant. They'd have to focus their heightened senses and close the corridor of their soul. For a sage, the soul corridor becomes more pronounced because our soul is taking shape. But for a savant, it is not the case, which means this young lady is incredibly skilled." Northern looked at him with a deadpan expression, causing Cal to frown slightly and inquire, "What? I'd really appreciate it if you do not speak at all rather than speak and be praising her." He turned to Raven. "And you? Wipe that grin off your face. You look hideous." Northern was right with this one because there were just some shows of expression that were not conversant with Raven's face. This particular one defied the representation of her entirety. Northern looked at the young man lying on the ground. Just like Cal had said, he was human in every form, except that he had pointed ears and very long hair with shades of red at their tips. His eyebrows were also thick and sharp. He himself, even unconscious, was flawlessly handsome. Northern sighed and looked at Raven. "Did he tell you that you will miss your chance of closing the rift forever and be trapped here if you kill him?" Raven nodded. "How do you know that?" "Because that is actually the case." He glanced at Cal. "We have to take Ulzard to the volcanic region where his brother Sura stays and where his sister is." Kikikikikiki. A creepy giggle crawled below as the unconscious handsome man woke up from his slumber. Chapter 317. The Name Thief Strikes Again. Northern and the rest turned their heads to where the eerie laughter was coming from. On the ground, Fano slowly rose. His limbs, however, were trembling such that Northern couldn't help but wonder what Raven had done to him. You think Sura, that bloody bastard, will just let you walk into his domain and take the girl? You don't know who you are up against." Northern looked at the trembling Fano and shook his head. "Aren't you and Sura supposed to be like two sides of a coin?" Fano raised his head slightly and glared at the person talking. Northern glanced at Raven as he continued. "She defeated you. What's to say she can't defeat Sura too?" Immediately the words were said. Fano let out a loud burst of laughter. He slowly rose to his feet afterwards, limbs still trembling, but he managed to stand. Then he gave Northern a vile glare. "You think any of you can lay your hands on Sura? Sides of the same coin? Bah, you know nothing, human. First of all, I am amazed that you can speak my tongue. But in the end, you all are just weaklings." Northern's facial expression contorted to a grim scowl. "How about you stop talking in circles and just be direct? Dumb. What's so hard for you to gain there? The hideous rule that this domain now follows, who do you think created it? Who do you think created me? Who do you think created the boy and the girl who are keys to destroying this place? And why do you think he did so?" The frown on Northern's face was getting deeper and darker. A guess entered his mind, and cautiously he muttered it out. "Sura. Exactly. The domain of the cold and the domain of the ice were both ruled by him. Out of boredom, he created the White Walkers, created the Red Walkers, created me, and created the keys. He called everything family and made it so complicated that no one would be able to destroy what he built." The explanation settled coldly into Northern's mind. For some reason, he could understand why Terence had instructed them to go straight for Sura after getting the boy. Inasmuch as all this rule existed, just killing Sura would have made everything else much easier. "You are in trouble. Since you have defeated me and killed all the White Walkers, he knows and is definitely expecting you all right now." Northern washed his face down with his palm and sighed. Everything just got complicated. Once again, he had made a very bad decision by deciding not to follow the Oracle's instructions. Not that he regretted it, yet, maybe if it becomes impossible to defeat Sura, he'll regret it then. Raven walked close to him and touched his shoulder. Her eyes met his with fierce determination. Then she said, "Don't worry about it. We will defeat Sura and close the rift. I am sure of it." Northern, of course, didn't blame her confidence. She, after all, wasn't hearing what Fano was saying. Lucky you. But he could use that arrogant confidence of hers. He closed his eyes and smiled. Then he glared at Fano. "None of it matters. We will defeat Sura too." Fano laughed out loud. "How stupid can you mortals be?" Northern looked around at Cal, who stood dumbfounded. "Snap out of it. What do we do now?" Cal shook his head slightly and let out a small smile. "I can't believe I played right into that bastard's hands." He looked at Northern and continued, "I don't think there's any other way right now except a direct confrontation. You are tired. You need your strength to do this. Worry about yourself. You are the one who has been running away from Sura all this while. What did you expect? And how did you get played?" Cal allowed a pale smile and intoned, "He told me that killing him will strengthen his brother. He said they share the same power. While he controls ice, his brother controls flames. He said if anyone wants to kill him, they should just use the boy king of the ice domain. He even looked forward to the day he will die." Northern nodded slightly. "I see, but if you look at it, it's not too deep of a lie. Maybe he just turned everything and expected you to figure it out. But you were naive to believe him. He was drunk." "Yes. From a volcano?" Cal went silent with a frown. Raven, who couldn't follow their conversation, just stayed there in silence. As both of them stopped bickering, she said to Northern, "So does this mean we are going to the hot region? I think I'll like it better there than this place. Mortal girl, why don't you reconsider what I say to you and become my underling? I will make you stronger," Fano said to Raven. Northern was shocked to hear him speak in their common language. He grimaced and rushed forward to grab him by the neck. "How are you able to speak our language?" Fano scowled in disgust. "Monster tongue is the origination and beginning of all other tongues. Any being with a semblance of intelligence would get it." Northern lowered his gaze for a second. What Fano said was true. Ulzard, after all, was getting it too. Raven gently removed Northern's hands and said to Fano, "Should I just kill you? I told you the moment you kill me all my powers would return to Sura. You'll be putting yourself in jeopardy." Northern stared for a couple of seconds, his eyes out of focus. He then gave Fano an offsetting smile. "I think I have an idea." Raven and Cal looked at him. "What idea is that?" Northern did not respond to them but instead just stared at Fano. "Monster profile. Name, White Walker. True name, Ignis Domius. Rank, Maelstrom. Danger level, Calamity. Attributes, Infernal. Abilities, Inferno, Phoenix Breath, Blazing Wrath, Ember, Pyroclasmic Edge. Conditions have been met. You can use the ability of your name, Nameless." Chapter 318. The Group Leader. Northern stared intently for a couple of seconds, inspecting every inch of Fano's abilities. As expected, he had some really amazing fire techniques. It'd be very cool to have them for himself. However, Northern had come to the limit of talent he could copy right now. He wasn't even sure he could copy the talent like that. What he could do, however, was substitute the name for his own and gain the abilities for a certain duration. Even that was limited and not permanent because Nameless was an overwhelming space of emptiness in his soul that would consume anything that tries to occupy it. Which meant that should he hold on to the name longer than he should, he'd lose it. Northern guessed that this trouble was from Chaos and Void, and the reason why Chaos and Void can find compatibility with him is because he did not have a core. However, the name stood a very great use, apart from being used as shards to improve his attributes. Northern could bestow these names to his summons. He wasn't sure if he could do it to anyone aside from his summons. But he had clearly inspected it and saw that he could give his summons names that he steals from other monsters or people. Which was why Northern decided to start stealing names. Although, stealing Fano's name was the only way to render him harmless and bearable through the next few steps that they'll be taking to confront Sura. Instead of Fano's power going back to Sura, he'd be taking it. But he was also sure that Sura would probably know the instant that happened. He didn't know what to expect from an enemy that is already expecting them. Northern was unsure what to do in a time like this, but at the very least it wasn't like they had any other choice but to go forward. So they were just going to go forward. The one thing he was certain of was that, I cannot die. He had too many cards up his sleeves to go down that path. Northern slowly extended his hand forward, the air humming with a silent anticipation of what he was to do. You have no essence, you have no identity. You are a storm that seeks to swallow and steal the identity and essence of everything around you. Nameless. Your path to ruin extends further before you. Do you want to absorb true name? Ignis Dominus. Northern nodded slightly and internally responded. Yes. Immediately. Fano opened his mouth and eyes wide. He could feel something leaving his body. Inasmuch as he had instinctively tried to wriggle himself out of Northern's grip, his strength ran away quickly, and in the next couple of beats he dropped to the ground. The red tint at the tip of his hair slowly faded, returning to black. Northern stared at his hand, clenched and opened it. Even though it was slight, he could feel the increase in strength within his soul. And a little bit of his void essence was also replenished. With mouths gaping and in different languages, Raven and Cal simultaneously asked, "What did you do to him?" Northern stared at them, hesitating for a moment, whether or not to really tell them. "Well, it does nothing for them to know. I took his true name," he said particularly to Raven. Raven frowned. "What did you say, you took his true name? How's that even possible?" Northern sighed. "It's possible because of my true name." "You have a true name?" "Of course I do. Practically everyone does." Raven's eyes stayed glued on him for a couple of seconds. Then she deeply inhaled and exhaled. She folded her arms, looked away, and when she turned her head back to Northern, her face was all scrunched up and almost pouting, making Northern wonder, did I do something wrong? Ignoring her the next second, he looked at Cal, who clearly understood what he just said, or at the very least got the idea of it. He was beginning to reconsider whether Cal understood their common language too. Or as Fano had said, anyone with a semblance of intelligence could puzzle the words together. Cal's voice interrupted the air. "So what do we do now? Sura will be expecting us." Northern nodded and tapped his shoulder. "I understand your fears and I've been there. Chin up and own your gut. The last thing that could happen to us is death." Cal gave him an unimpressed look. "You do realize that dying means you will cease to exist." Northern looked at Raven and pulled Fano up. The poor guy had lost the majority of his strength, although still retained his otherworldly beauty. His eyes opened slightly. He tried to talk but lacked strength. Having his true name taken away from him was like taking his soul essence from him. It'd take some time for a significant amount of it to be replenished. In that time, he'll be rendered weak and useless. A clone appeared next to Northern and collected him, placing the now nameless guardian on his shoulder. Then they began to walk out of the mountain depth. A couple of minutes later, they were outside. Having met his 3 clones and Corpse Eater, Lamla on the way outside, all that made it out were Northern, Raven, Pangu for clones, Lamla, Cal, and Ulzard, who was still unconscious, being carried by one of Northern's clones. They all stood at the entrance and watched the crude scene Raven had left behind. Northern glanced at her once again. This time he wondered how old she was and how she could viciously slay monsters like that without any emotional drawback whatsoever. How dark and traumatic was her childhood to make her grow up so fast. But the next minute, he shoved it out of his mind and decided to focus. If he was right, they still had a long journey ahead of them. "I don't know how this is done. This is my first time challenging the Guardian of a Rift with anyone, and this is my second time in a rift. So, I'm sure both of you are more experienced than me. Who'd be willing to take the reins to be the leader of this situational party?" Raven stared at him coldly for a few seconds. She scoffed and commented, "I certainly was not expecting such words from you." Cal also smiled and shrugged a little bit but didn't say anything, which caused Northern to look at both of them and thought, was I wrong? The logic he had worked with was what he often heard about while growing up. A rift of more than one person needed someone to be in control of it. This was why a master, or of higher rank, was required to go along if it was a group of drifter ranks. If it was a group of masters, a savant or even a sage was required. By all common sense, Cal should be their leader, but Northern was having mixed feelings about saying that out loud. He'd honestly preferred if Raven did the job rather than him. He still couldn't bring himself to trust the guy. He turned to Raven after none of them was willing to say anything. "So you're going to do it then? Why would I? When you're here?" Northern tilted his head back. He didn't understand what she meant by that. "What do you mean?" he questioned. Raven spoke, gesticulating with her hand as she did. "You are the one that survived a Tier V rift on your own all alone. If there's anyone that should be leading this situational party as you painted it, that should be you." She ended with her finger pointing to his face. Northern looked at her with irritation dancing across his face. Instead, Raven looked at Cal and inquired of him, "Do you have any objections?" Cal shook his head slightly and smiled at Northern. The expression he had on said all that was needed of his words. Raven gave Northern a confident grin and said, "It looks like you will be leading us on this great expenditure. I am glad you got a chance to prove yourself." Northern's face contorted into severe disgust, one that was on a different and more vivid level from before. He was outrightly showing how distasteful her words were. Prove himself? To whom? Why would he ever want to do that? He had never had that line of thought, nor would he ever, lest he start living his life for anyone other than himself. Call me selfish and self-centered, but that's what every other person does too. Northern exhaled and then spoke. "If you guys want me to lead you, I will do so. However, I have to know we are all on board and that everyone in this party can be trusted." His eyes stayed glued to Cal. "Which means if there is any secret or any information that would be useful to us, it'd be wise to share it now." Cal sighed and smiled a little bit. Of course, he knew where Northern was trying to bite hard. He looked at Northern and confidently declared, "I don't have anything that will help us, and I am keeping no secrets that will bring us harm." Northern swallowed his spit and glared more before finally declaring their way forward. The group of Northerns, monsters and drifters, traversers, made their way forth to the hot region. Chapter 319. You Underestimated the Wrong Guy Part 1. The journey to the hot region was tedious. It was for this reason that Northern had commanded Pangu to go back with Fano and wait for them in the ice region. Although Cal objected to this idea, saying it was best that they all moved together and came back together. But Northern thought of it as a dumb idea. No good came out of walking together. They were a lot in this cohort. 3 Northerns, minus the original one, was carrying Ulzard, who surprisingly was still unconscious till now. There was Lamla the corpse eater, Raven, and Cal himself. The cohort was of 7. If he was to add Call and Fano, that would be 9. For some reason, Northern felt that number was needless. Besides, they will still be coming back to the cold region after defeating Sura and retrieving the core from the depth of the volcanic mountain. No matter what Cal said, Northern turned deaf ears to it. Even when Cal said this was an issue he could easily solve by dispelling his clone and allowing him to carry Ulzard, or even Raven could do the job of carrying if Northern didn't want to. But Northern didn't agree with him. He didn't oblige to any of Cal's suggestions and claimed his position as the leader. "If you were going to keep telling me what to do, why didn't you just go ahead and be the party leader yourself?" It was then that Cal's incessant proffers stopped, and they peacefully, for the main time, continued their journey forward, trailing beneath the spectral light in the sky. When they left the ice region, the day had dawned. Their journey consummated 2 days and 1 night, which they spent with barely enough rest, as neither of them knew what they were planning, although Northern made sure to get enough rest. How he did that was simple. He retreated into the limitless void to do so. Just like how he could retreat his consciousness into the void, he could also do the same with his physical body. However, Northern had always been worried about the sudden absence of his physical body and the all-of-a-sudden presence of it. However, with 3 clones actively around, he could make himself disappear and no one would suspect the unusual. Although at a point, Raven ended up asking him why he kept making one of his clones disappear and appear again. That one was an observant one, so Northern was kind of expecting it. But he didn't give her an answer other than, "I'm just checking something." It was in that conversation that he was also warranted to ask her, "Do you trust him?" Given the fact that Cal was a bit away from them and couldn't hear them, or else he has some kind of superhuman hearing, there was no better time for such a question to be asked. And her response was, "I don't know. I don't trust him, but I trust you. Do you trust him?" Northern clicked his tongue silently in disgust. Why does her response always have to be weird? He muttered to her, "I don't trust him. Not even one bit." Their conversation for that time was short. They talked about Raven's initial plan and why she'd just abandon it to follow him. But she allowed him to understand that Terrence was in perfect control of the plan and told him not to worry about his share of the cores. She intended to keep her promise to the very end. However, Northern was still bothered as to why Raven did what she did. It made no sense to follow him into the rift, which she had a number of cores waiting for her which she could use to reach the stage of a sage. She could even take his portion and hope for him to die, hence becoming an ascendant, although that might prove to be more tasking than whatever any of them had had to face to proceed in rank. He didn't understand her line of thinking at all, and why she would put herself in jeopardy for the sake of a guy that she barely even knows. Maybe she likes me. Northern thought about it for a while and shrugged at the idea. Whether or not it is true does not fascinate him, as he is not interested in her in any way. Moreover, she's a kid. So he forbade it right immediately. On the night of the second day, they arrived at the hot region. Alas, their journey was worth it. Right from the afternoon, they were already beginning to feel a drastic change in the weather condition of the atmosphere. First of all, the cold slowly reduced as they went further. It got to a point they were neither cold nor hot. It was at that point Raven removed the coat that was knitted for her and continued with her usual black armor. Then they started to feel so much heat that Northern had to remove the Night Terror armor and use the Twilight Dawn, which made it quite easier for him to mix in with his clone. When the volcanic mountain came into view at the horizon, the heat was already causing them all to sweat buckets. All of them except Cal, who said he had a heat-resisting item. Northern too remembered owning something like that at a time, but his was fire. However, he had sold it all to Hao. And Saloon's amulet did more to him as regards to water than ice, fire or cold. All its order abilities were awesome but all water-related. So even though he had the necklace on, it was pretty useless in this regard. They continued forward nonetheless, and after a while, the entire landscape came into view before them. Unlike the ice settlement, this one had no walls. It was an ashen landscape with a sinister tapestry of crimson and obsidian. The heart of this forsaken land was dominated by a grand palace, its towering spires piercing the sulphurous sky. Eerie red lights flickered from its windows, casting a ghastly glow that mingled with the smoke and ash spiraling from the volcano's ever-active maw. Crimson fissures of molten lava etched their way through the ground, like veins of the earth's lifeblood seeping to the surface. The air was thick with the acrid stench of sulfur and the low rumble of the mountain's restive belly. Each crack pulsated with a relentless heat, illuminating the settlement in a malevolent red hue that danced on the blackened stone. The homes of the monstrous denizens, compared to that of the White Walkers, clustered haphazardly around the palace, their makeshift structures barely holding against the relentless heat and occasional tremors. Built from the same dark stones and scorched materials, these dwellings appeared almost organic, as if they had grown out of the cracked and smoking earth itself. All of them stood for a couple of seconds, observing in silence from afar. Separating them and the main settlement was a large river of molten lava. So, what's the way forward? Raven turned to ask Northern but suddenly jumped back. In that selfsame moment, Cal's sword flashed blindly, cleanly cutting off Northern's head. Blood sprayed into the air and his body slowly crumbled to the ground. The stranger lowered his head a little bit and muttered, "I'm sorry." 3 of Northern's clones stood frozen, and soon began to melt into the air. Raven, who had seen everything happen so fast, was entrapped in so much confusion and rage that she froze without meaning to. He just killed Northern. Northern was dead? He killed him. Why would he? Why would Northern die? She suddenly exhaled. In that moment, all the emotions that were swirling inside of her melted. Then she looked at Cal with a cold glare in her eyes. He was right about you. She took a moment to look at Northern's lifeless body on the ground, his head a couple of feet away from the main body. Your partner just died and that's what you were going to say? You were not going to cry, go crazy and attack me. Raven raised her chin a little bit, gazing at him with a deadpan expression for a little while before she responded. I have seen more deaths than you ever have. I watched my own mother die before my very eyes and was not allowed to scream or cry. How much more him? She looked at him again for a second and returned her gaze to Cal. I'm disappointed in you if you think you had him with that. Cal looked at Northern's body. He was clearly dead. He had been very keen on the right one. Because Northern was walking with his clone, it was quite difficult to follow which one was the real Northern. However, he was able to. The main Northern was the one that often hung around Raven, spoke with her while the others just stayed silent. Of course, that made much sense to him. They were clones after all. Talking was a bit too much. It was impossible for him to make his clones talk. If he could do that, then he'd have been able to permanently copy his abilities. And it was impossible to permanently copy one's abilities, because that would mean copying the talents too. A drifter cannot have more than one talent, because they only have one soul core. That was Cal's line of thinking and his reason for all his estimations of Northern. However, he had greatly underestimated Northern. Chapter 320. You underestimated the wrong guy, Part 2. Cal thought of what Raven had said just now but threw it out of his head as he looked at Northern's corpse lying on the ground. It was fresh, the eyes on his decapitated head shocked and glassy, mouth slightly opened. His surprise attack must have really surprised Northern. He was at least very proud of himself for that. Now all that was left was to deal with this young lady. But Cal hesitated seriously. Raven was a savant just a rank below him. After what had gone down between him and Northern, he wanted to be insanely careful. Moreover, there was something about Raven that silently screamed danger to his ears. But he didn't have to take care of her. Suddenly, he relaxed his posture and straightened his back, adjusting the back of his strained neck with his hand. Raven creased her brows, carefully inquiring. What do you think you are doing? Cal pointed to himself. What am I doing? He shrugged nonchalantly. There was a collectedness to the way he spoke that was unbefitting of the situation they were in. I don't need to fight you, he said, looking at Raven. He paused for a few heartbeats before adding, he'd do so himself. Immediately after Cal spoke, a voice suddenly joined them. No, Caladhel, I will not fight a young girl like that. Ayah! What image are you trying to paint me as? Startled by the sudden appearance of a voice without feeling any physical presence, Raven looked around in caution, raising her sword with even more caution. Cal frowned anxiously at the presence of the voice. Raven was silent, but her eyes were coldly monitoring her surroundings, somehow searching for any signs of its physical presence. What a sharp lady you are. Don't worry, I will come to you. A second after the voice spoke, something dropped out of the sky, emitting a dark purple light. Even though it had fallen, it didn't create any shockwave, as if it was as light as a feather. The light around it dimmed and soon revealed a man that looked to be in his mid-20s, with an aura of youthful confidence and an unsettling calmness around him. His hair, a tousled cascade of midnight blue, framed a face that held a perpetual smile, as inviting as a sunbeam breaking through the morning mist. He was draped in a traditional garb that flowed like a river in hues of soft gray and deep black, each fold and layer meticulously arranged to complement the natural grace with which he held himself. The fabric of his robe was adorned with subtle, intricate patterns, reminiscent of ancient calligraphy etched into stone, whispering tales of an era long lost. The man with his hands behind his back walked towards Raven and leaned his face closer to hers. For some reason, she wasn't hostile towards him, as she didn't feel any hostility from him. But she was cautious, causing her to lean her face away from his. His smile was delightful and made his eyes shine heartily. He looked to the ground where Northern's body was strewn. Then he touched his chest with a mournful expression on his face. But Raven could see right through the pretense. It wasn't hard in fact, because he was exuding mockery rather than sincerity. She said nothing and just carefully observed the man. It was not because she couldn't talk. In fact, it was rare for Raven to be this careful. She usually leaped before she looked and bore the consequences much later. But right now, her entire composure belied what had been known of her so far. The man, after, in his way, mourning Northern, turned to Ulzard who was lying on the ground, still unconscious. Then he turned to Raven. "I hope you didn't mind that Cal killed your friend." Raven raised a brow but the man continued. "I commanded him to do it. This your friend." A slight frown showed on his face but quickly disappeared. "Anyways, he is out of the way so nothing to worry about anymore. Welcome to the city of Fire Marabeth." Raven was not surprised anymore that these human-looking monsters could speak their common language. But the way he was dressed, although strange, was familiar to her in a way. It was almost like how her ancestors dressed. There was something about him that was utterly unsettling. He boasted of immense strength in every slight movement of his body, but at the same time had the presence of a genteel scholar. This evaluation left her confused and unsure of how to handle the situation. She was the only one presently in this place, and if this guy was really Sura, the one they've been hearing about, then there was no way she'd be able to handle him on her own. He was a maelstrom rank from her point of view, but he had an aura that put him on a different level from all the maelstrom ranks she had ever met, which made her deduce that he was probably an apex level. This would be nothing like the battle with the Kirathon. This, after all, was a monster with intelligence. And by the looks of him, a whole lot of intelligence and sneaky ways. "Young lady, I guess that you are shocked by your friend's death. But let not the past hold you from the blessings that the future seeks to usher into your life. Grieve, but let it be brief." He massaged his jaw with a smug expression and gave a side eye to where Cal was silently standing. "How was that, Caladhel?" Dispirited, Cal responded with a blank and boring tone. "Your sense of humor is ever increasing. You seem to be having a better grasp on puns these days." The words seemed rehearsed. In truth, he had spoken them so much that they were now boring to his own ears. But still, this sentient being always required that he did. Instantly, the man turned to him and held his shoulders, saying with a serious expression, "This kind of thing, Caladhel, you have to mean it. It's not like I asked you to compliment me. So mean it. Okay? Say it with a bright face and choose another word this time. Something more glamorous. You two have to work on your spoken words. In fact, I can be your tutor." "Yes, I should tutor you." With each word of his, Cal grew increasingly more tired in his expression. Suddenly, a hoarse voice rang from behind them. "Damn! I'm so disgusted I could vomit right now." If you want access to fast updates or the full novel in high-quality audio, contact me now and buy. I offer over 300 complete audiobooks from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, and more. No locked episodes, no subscriptions, just one-time payment via PayPal or Ko-fi. Message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out the full list of available novels on Discord. Start listening to your next favorite audiobook today.